Chapter 951. Outside the clothing shop, a horse carriage was parked at a certain alley on the street. At a certain moment, a young voice rang out from within the carriage. "Why isn't there any movement inside?" "I don't know. Do you want me to go over and take a look?" The coachman turned back to look at the carriage and asked in a probing manner. "There's no need." A voice rang out from within the carriage. "Wait for another 15 minutes. If there's still no news, we'll leave." The coachman nodded. He had just turned around when he saw a few figures walking out from the shop toward the horse carriage. His countenance changed, and he was about to shake the reins to leave when he turned back and saw a man sitting on the other side of the horse carriage, smiling at him. "This brother, how are you?" Li Yi and Chen Chong stood in front of the horse carriage, looking at it, and said, "Come down." There was no movement in the horse carriage. After an unknown period of time, the curtains of the carriage were pulled open, and a young man walked out from within. The moment Chen Chong saw that young man, his countenance turned extremely grim. "Lord Chen, how have you been?" The well-dressed young man tidied up his clothes, cupped his hands together, and smiled at Chen Chong, looking like an old friend whom he had not seen for many years. Over 10 people who looked like guards appeared behind him at the same time. "This is?" Li looked at Chen Chong and asked. "This commoner pays his respects to Prince Xian." Chen Chong bowed slightly, indicating the identity of the person before him. Li Yi was stunned. He looked at Chen Chong and asked, "Have you tolerated it?" Chen Chong lowered his head, remaining silent. This meant that he had tolerated it. After all, the current Chen clan could not possibly go up against Prince Xian. Since Prince Xian had tolerated it, there was no reason for Chen Chong not to. Third young mistress Chen walked out of the shop hurriedly. She looked at Chen Chong and said anxiously, "Second brother, I'm fine. Don't be rash." Looking at the white-haired lady's pale face and the bandage on her hand, which had traces of blood seeping out, Li Yi sighed, turned back, looked at that young man, and asked, "Who are you again?" The young man looked at him with a hint of doubt in his eyes. "You are?" Li Yi cupped his hands. "I am Li Yi." The young man's expression froze, but he quickly smiled and said, "I just sent an invitation to Dr. Li a few days ago. The servants of the Li family said that Dr. Li is seriously ill and can't go out. I don't know what illness Dr. Li is suffering from. It's only been a few days, but it seems that he has recovered." Li looked at him and suddenly slapped his face. Before he could react, Li asked, "Now do you know what illness I have?" "You. Hysteria, intermittent hysteria. The emperor personally issued an imperial edict. Hitting people in Jingdo is not illegal." Half of the young man's face had temporarily lost all feeling, and an expression of disbelief appeared on his face. At the next moment, the young man pointed at Li Jie and said fiercely, "How dare you? I'm Prince Xian Li Jie. How dare you?" Li Yi was puzzled. "Believe in what?" "Prince Xian Li Jie." "What Jie?" "Prince Xian Li Jie." "Why are you speaking so loudly?" "So what if he's called Li Jie?" "So what if he's called Li Jie? How dare you make fun of me?" "Pa." Li Yi slapped the other side of his face again, looked at him and said, "What do you mean by believing in Jie or not? Young man, can't you straighten out your tongue before you speak?" Earlier, it was only half of his face. Now it was his entire face. The young man could no longer speak. Li looked at Chen Chong and asked in a soft voice, "Have you calmed down?" A hint of elation appeared on Chen Chong's face as he shook his head slightly. It was just 2 slaps. How could his anger be appeased? If the Chen clan was still the Chen clan and Prince Xian was not Prince Xian, it would already be letting him off too easily. "If you still haven't vented your anger." Li Yi took out the dagger that Mississippi Lu had given him from his sleeves and handed it to Chen Chong, saying, "This is for you. Do it yourself." Reality once again proved that Chen Chong was a man who did not mean what he said. Li Yi kept the dagger and looked at Chen Chong with a hint of puzzlement on his face. He asked, "What happened earlier?" The over 10 guards behind Prince Xian all drew their weapons and dropped them onto the ground almost at the same time. The unkempt old man threw a peanut into his mouth, and that man ran over with a fawning expression asking, "Senior, are you thirsty? Would you like a cup of tea?" Prince Xian regained his calmness. He glared at Li Yi and asked, Li County Marquis Li Dr. Li, are you really going to do this? This is? Li looked at Chen Chong and asked, puzzled. Chen Chong immediately introduced, this is Prince Xian. Li looked at him and said in astonishment, Prince Xian, what did you mean by that? Let's go. Prince Xian did not throw him another look and turned to get into the carriage. The guards behind him heaved a sigh of relief, picked up their weapons, and left quickly. Things happened very quickly. Before the crowd on the streets could gather, they dispersed very quickly. Third young Miss Chen looked at him worriedly. You. How could you do this? That's Prince Xian. Li walked over, looked at him and asked in concern. Does your hand still hurt? In this world, other than his family and friends, there were two people whom he would definitely not allow anyone to hurt. One was because he could not give up on his bloodline, and the other was because of a debt that could not be made up for. Regardless of whether it was King Shu or Prince Xian, there was no need for them to consider these things. Third young Miss Chen looked at him with a helpless expression. However, her tone turned gentle as she said, come in first. At the entrance of the shop, Chen Chong took a step forward and asked, it's not Prince Xian? Li nodded. Then it's King Qi. Li shook his head. Chen Chong revealed a surprised expression, but he did not ask any more. It was only after a long while that he said, no matter if it's him or not, he's still a prince. You were a little rash today. He sighed and said, no matter what, thank you for today. There's no need to thank me. Li looked at him and said in disdain, you don't even dare to stand up for your kin when they're being bullied. You coward. A few dark lines appeared on Chen Chong's forehead. Did standing up for Miao Yu mean that he had taken his dagger and stabbed Prince Xian twice? Even if he, the greatest sycophant in the Jing kingdom, were to do something like this, he would not be able to resolve the matter peacefully, right? The people from the Li family were really as detestable as ever. On the streets, in a carriage that was moving slowly, that coachman said, feeling a little indignant, that sycophant dares to be so audacious just because he has His Majesty's favor. He's not showing any respect for His Highness and the royal family. As long as His Highness accuses His Majesty. Shut up. An extremely stifled voice rang out from within the carriage. Prince Xian's expression was one of shame and fury. But there was even more fear. He was furious and ashamed because he had been humiliated by Li Yi in front of so many people. If this were to spread to other people's ears, how would he, a prince, still have any face left to speak of? What was terrifying was that that person was his father's most favored subject, going in and out of the palace all the time. His father's trust in him was greater than that of any other subject. If there was an important matter, how could he possibly not know about it? Although it had not been announced to the public who would be the Eastern Palace, many of the subjects in the imperial court, including Prince Xian, definitely knew. If the crown prince was Li Jie, then why would Li Yi dare to do this to him? He clenched his fists tightly, and his knuckles turned white. He gritted his teeth and said, King Qi, King Qi. Is it King Qi? Chapter 952. The news of Prince Xian being slapped in the face in public spread like wildfire. During this period of time, everyone in the capital had their eyes on Prince Xian and Prince Qi. If something were to really happen to them, no one would be able to hide it. Moreover, this had happened in broad daylight, and the process was very simple. There was no need for too much guesswork. Although not everyone knew about the relationship between the Chen clan and Prince Xian, many officials and nobles in the capital knew about it. Chen Qing was Prince Xian's uncle. Compared to King Shu, Prince Xian should be closer to the Chen clan. However, a long time ago, the Chen clan had firmly stood on King Shu's side. There was no such thing as closeness in the imperial court. Back then, the power that Prince Xian possessed was far too different from King Shu's. The Chen clan's choice would decide the clan's rise and fall for the next several decades. Therefore, they naturally had to choose a good tree to live in. Therefore, the Chen clan ended up in the current situation. Seeing that the Chen clan had fallen to such a state, Prince Xian, who had been given up on by the Chen clan back then, was now a popular candidate to fight for the position of crown prince. It was normal for him to kick the Chen clan when they were down. It was not strange for him to be slapped in the face when he was down. With His Majesty's previous decree, it wouldn't be a problem for County Marquis Li to beat up a few people in the capital. Although this person was Prince Xian, wasn't there still the precedent of King Shu? Some people felt that it was strange. Prince Xian and the Chun clan did not have a good relationship, but the Li family and the Chun clan seemed to have a deep feud. To think that they would stand up for the Chun clan and slap Prince Xian. It was really hard to distinguish the complicated relationship. There were also people who felt that Li Yi was arrogant and condescending, relying on His Majesty's favor and trust to look down on even the princes. Such a person would be a sycophant in any dynasty. When the new emperor took over, he would definitely not have a good ending. Of course, there were even more people who felt that Prince Xian would not be able to fight for the position of crown prince this time around. Although that legendary County Marquis Li often did shocking things, he had never been a rash person. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for him to reach his current position over the past few years. This meant that he was not afraid of Prince Xian's revenge. It was because Prince Xian was just Prince Xian. Prince Xian, who was going to start preparing to return to his conferred land after the imperial court meeting. This was a piece of news that shed a bright light on the confusing struggle for the throne. Qi Manor. The Prince of Qi was pacing back and forth in his residence. Hearing the sound of footsteps coming from outside, he hastily walked out and asked a servant, "Has it been confirmed? Is this matter true?" That servant said agitatedly, "Your Highness, this matter is absolutely true. I've already verified it a few times. That Lord Li has really made a move against Prince Xian." "Haha, as expected, as expected." Laughing maniacally, the Prince of Qi declared, "Prepare a generous gift for I and deliver it to official Li's residence." Yes. That person immediately retreated. He was thinking about how generous and heavy the gift was. Before the hysteria broke out, Li Yi had already predicted the impact of this incident. The situation in the capital was very complicated, and the current situation was very chaotic. If something were to happen to Prince Xian, it would cause quite a big commotion. What followed after was all sorts of guesses. There were so many princes in the capital, and these two slaps had eliminated a wrong answer for them. Those small clans who had submitted to Prince Xian early on would be able to immediately look for another ruler. They would definitely feel especially grateful toward him. The facts proved that his guess was right. Very soon, someone came to deliver a gift. Fong, who had not been seen for 2 days, walked in and asked, "Young master, are you going to accept the gift from the Prince of Qi Manor?" Li Yi waved his hand. No. One must have a bottom line. He understood the reason why the Prince of Qi had sent a gift. The two princes who had been in the limelight during the fight for the throne in the capital were the Prince of Qi and Prince Xian. Now that Prince Xian had been eliminated as the wrong answer, the Prince of Qi was confident and naturally wanted to send a gift to express his gratitude. However, the Prince of Qi was also a wrong answer. If Fong Xingjian were to accept his gift, wouldn't it give him the misconception that he was already halfway to the throne? All right, I'll get them to bring it back. Fong took a few steps, gave it some thought, and then turned back to ask, "Are you really not going to accept it? Is the gift from the Prince of Qi very heavy?" This was a matter of principle and not a matter of whether the gift was heavy or not. Li Yi hesitated for a moment, looked at Fong, and asked, "How heavy is it?" In a certain aristocratic manner in the capital, a servant ran into the study anxiously and said anxiously, "Old master, bad news. Lord Li has accepted the Prince of Qi's heavy gift." "As expected? As expected? For real? For real? Prince Xian isn't a good person. Prepare the carriage. I'm going to pay a visit to His Highness the Prince of Qi immediately." In the study, a man hurriedly changed into casual clothes and was about to leave. The servant asked out of curiosity, "Old master, since Lord Li has accepted the Prince of Qi's gift, does this mean that His Highness the Prince of Qi is the crown prince that His Majesty and the officials have decided on?" "What do you know?" The man waved his hand. "If not, why would Lord Li accept the Prince of Qi's gift? Could it be that he covets those things?" Qin Manor. Qin Xiang looked at the letter in his hand, shook his head slightly and mumbled, "This matter is already muddy enough. Does he still want to stir it up further?" Prince Exian Manor. He really accepted it? Prince Exian slumped weakly onto the chair, his countenance pale. That person had slapped him in the face and accepted the Prince of Chi's gift. Was there a need to say more about the meaning behind this? He had lost. He had completely lost. Prince Exian's gaze looked toward the empty space outside the door. He gritted his teeth and revealed a venomous expression in his eyes. Prepare the carriage. We're going to the Prince of Chi Manor. Lord Butler, just send me off here. A man smiled and walked out from the Prince of Chi Manor, saying, in the future, I'll definitely follow His Highness's lead. He walked down the stairs, and a luxurious carriage happened to stop at the manor's entrance. Prince Exian. When the man saw the young man who came down from the carriage, he broke into an awkward expression. After all, he had just said that he would follow Prince Exian's orders at the Prince of Exian Manor yesterday. Today he was at the Prince of Chi Manor's entrance, and he was even seen by the person involved. Women who had two hearts were not likable, and men who were fickle and two-timing were not good people either. The middle-aged man lowered his head and immediately left in shame. Prince Exian did not look at him. His gaze turned toward the Prince of Chi Manor and said, "Bring me to meet Brother Chi Manor." The Prince of Chi Manor was seated in the main hall. It was only when Prince Exian walked in that he raised his head to take a look. After Prince Exian walked over, he knelt down on one knee and said loudly, "Greetings, brother." The Prince of Chi Manor was stunned for a moment, but he instantly understood what Prince Exian meant. He broke into a victorious smile, walked over, and gently helped Prince Exian up. He smiled and said, "There's no need to be so polite between us brothers." Since it was a fight for the throne, there would naturally be people who would succeed and people who would fail. Those who failed would usually not end up well. For Prince Exian to have done such a thing before the results were announced, the meaning of him surrendering was very clear. "I've heard about what happened today." The Prince of Chi Manor looked at him and said slowly. The Prince of Chi Manor looked at him and said slowly, "That Li Yi is really going overboard. Slapping brother's face is the same as slapping the royal family's face. It's the same as slapping my face." Prince Exian knew that the Prince of Chi Manor's words were filled with righteous indignation, and might be feeling very happy inside. Therefore he did not continue on this topic. He knelt down once again and said respectfully, "Since I've lost, I'll be at brother's disposal in the future. I only hope that brother will spare my life on account of our past relationship." The Prince of Chi Manor's countenance was a little grim. He helped Prince Exian up once again and said unhappily, "What are you saying? Since we're both princes, it's inevitable for us to fight for the throne. No matter who wins or loses, we're still brothers. Do you think that I, the prince, will do something so disgraceful and immoral?" Of course, part of the reason why the Prince of Chi Manor's countenance was not very good was because his thoughts had been seen through. Although the Prince of Chi Manor had won against Prince Exian for now, there was no guarantee that Prince Exian would not have such thoughts in the future. The simplest and most convenient method was of course to kill him, and end everything once and for all. However, if Prince Exian were to do something like this right after he ascended to the throne, it would be a source of ridicule for others. Moreover, Prince Exian knew how to adapt to the circumstances, so the Prince of Chi Manor could not go overboard. "Thank you, brother." Although Prince Exian did not dare to do this, he still said respectfully, "I'll congratulate brother in advance." The Prince of Chi Manor smiled. The truth was already very clear, and there was no need for him to hide it anymore. Although this is a great joyous occasion for brother. Prince Exian looked at him and said, "There's one person that brother must be on guard against." The Prince of Chi Manor looked at him and asked, "You're talking about Li?" Prince Exian nodded and said, "This person has already made a name for himself in the imperial court, and is able to influence the situation in the imperial court. He's also arrogant and despotic. To think that he doesn't fear the royal family now. I'm just afraid that when the time comes, he'll be a threat to brother." The Prince of Chi Manor fell silent for a moment before suddenly patting Prince Exian's shoulder, and saying with a smile, "Don't worry. The day brother ascends to the throne will be the day that crafty subject dies." Chapter 953. Brother, there's no need to send me off. Brother, take care. Regardless of what they were thinking, at the very least, when Prince Chi and Prince Xian walked out of the hall, their faces were filled with smiles, looking like brothers. After walking out of the Prince Chi manor and getting into the carriage, Prince Xian's countenance turned grim. Putting aside the fact that he had become the true loser in the fight for the throne, as a prince, he had even been humiliated on the streets. The worst thing that had happened in his entire life had happened in these 2 days. I want to see how long you can continue to be smug. He gritted his teeth and said coldly, before that, I'll settle a small debt first. He lifted the curtain and said in a soft voice, help I investigate something. After returning to the hall, a hint of a cold smile appeared on Prince Chi's face. So what if he had authority over the entire court? So what if he could cover the sky with one hand? No matter how much his father favored him, when he ascended to the throne, it would just be a single decree for him to be dealt with. There were too many such examples in history. The ruler was the ruler, and the subjects were the subjects. If the ruler wanted the subjects to die, the subjects had no choice but to die. How could a mere county marquis have the capability to rebel? Is this a rebellion? Lu Dao rubbed his head and said in a soft voice in the county yamen. As the year approached, there were more matters to handle in the yamen. There was a huge flow of people in the capital, and it was hard to maintain law and order. There would be over 10 small cases of theft and robbery every day. Although there were no major cases, just these trivial matters were enough to give him a headache. What made him even more vexed was that when the constables in the yamen were investigating some old cases, they discovered some new clues. This caused him to feel a chill in his heart. This included the case of the son of the former assistant minister of the Ministry of Works. Although it had been a long time, that case was too important. The number of deaths was high, and the way they died was so tragic that it attracted the attention of the entire capital. Even if it was hard to close the case, it was impossible to just let it go so easily. Thankfully, there were finally some clues to this case. Holy religion. As the mystery of that thing called holy religion was gradually revealed, Lu Dao felt as if he had sensed a huge hibernating beast hiding somewhere in the capital, secretly observing everything. This feeling made one's hair stand on end. How many people did the holy religion have in the capital? Who was the person called the Empress? He had no way of knowing, but it was precisely because of this mystery that people were afraid of. The new year was approaching, and the Imperial Court Conference was approaching. They could not afford to have any trouble during this period of time. In the coming year, they would have to report this matter to the Imperial Court and treat it seriously. Li Yi had a headache. The old madam had already told him several times that only when the family ate together on New Year's Eve could it be called a reunion dinner. If there was one less person, it would not be a reunion. The one with the least was naturally drunk in ink. Even Rui had mentioned to him several times that it wasn't appropriate for the Li family to live outside all the time, as outsiders would gossip about her. But the problem was that drunk Imo was still thinking of ways to win over her best friend and add another mistress to the Li family. The time was not very ripe yet. This was really a headache-inducing matter. Li Yi was trying to persuade drunk Imo, otherwise he would have to persuade the old madam and Rui when he went back. Rui was the easiest to talk to, but the old madam was not easy to deal with. She could use that kind of sincere tone to talk in his ear for a whole day. In the whole family, besides Mississippi Lu, she was the person that Li Yi was most afraid of. Persuading drunk Imo alone was easier than persuading both of them. I'm fine with anything. Drunk Imo looked up at him and said, but if I move over now, Sister Ruoqing will definitely not go with me. It's not the right time, and I'm afraid it will have the opposite effect. Li Yi thought about it, and felt that one couldn't always think of simple and easy things. Sometimes one had to challenge difficult things. Drunk Imo suddenly looked at him and asked, there's a question I want to ask you. What is it? Li Yi smiled. His expression was unchanged, but his heart immediately became alert. She looked at Li Yi and asked curiously, me and Sister Ruoqing, who did you like first? Li Yi looked up at the night sky, as if thinking. After a moment he shook his head and said, tonight's moon. Drunk Imo looked at him and said, there's no moon tonight, not even stars. No, there were stars. A few starlights appeared in Li Yi's eyes, streaking across the night sky and flying in this direction. The starlight fell on the roof and ignited a raging fire. It was not starlight but fire. Drunk Emma was startled, and her expression changed. She said, "Sister Ruoqing is still inside. Protect her," Li Yi said in a low voice, and a maid-like woman at the door flashed and appeared beside Drunk Emma. A few more spots of light flew in different directions, and at the same time, a few figures appeared in the night sky, rushing in the direction of the fire. Inside the room, Wan Ruoqing, who was reading at the table, had not realized what had happened when she was carried out of the room by Li Yi. Her face was red, and it was not until she was carried into the courtyard by Li Yi and saw the fire on the roof that her face began to turn pale. "Is there anything important in the room?" Li Yi asked quickly, ready to rush in again. The fire on the roof had spread, and it would not spread to the room for a while. It was too late to put out the fire, but there was still time to move some things out of the room. "No." Wan Ruoqing grabbed his hand and shook her head. "There's nothing important. Don't take risks." Drunk Emma looked at her and seemed to think of something. She immediately said, "You're painting." Wan Ruoqing held Li Yi's hand tightly and shook her head. "It's not important." In fact, time came in a hurry, but she was holding his hand, and Li Yi could not rush in with her. These two rooms were not the only ones on fire in the Zeng residence. Several guest rooms and the rooms where the servants lived were also on fire. There should be kerosene on the arrows. Otherwise the fire could not have spread so quickly. People kept rushing in from outside and fighting the fire with the servants in the residence. Li Yi held the two women's hands and sat in the courtyard, watching the fire gradually engulf the entire room. After a while, a few people came in from outside, shook their heads and said, "3 men of sacrifice. We just caught up with them and they died of poison." Li Yi used to have many enemies, but now they were all in prison or on the way to exile. It was impossible for them to do something like setting a fire in the middle of the night. There were men of sacrifice and fire arrows. It was not a small matter. It was just that this person was a little too impatient. Feng dashed over in exasperation and scolded furiously. "That damned person is so immoral. 5 rooms have been burned. No one will be able to stay here tonight." Li Yi looked at the fire and said in a soft voice, "Prince Xian." "What? Prince Xian?" Feng was stunned for a moment. Then he turned and walked out. "I'll bring people to burn down Prince Xian residence right now." Li Yi pulled him back in time. The people were already dead, and there was no evidence. How could they accuse Prince Xian? Even if it was found out that Prince Xian had instructed others to do it, which of the charges of setting fire to a commoner's residence and setting fire to the prince's residence was greater? Recently, the weather had been dry, and the residences of the nobles were all closely connected. It would be bad if the innocent were to be implicated. It would not be as simple as waiting for him to leave the capital and breaking his legs. However, the Zeng residence held a special meaning to drunken Mo. Li Yi looked at her worriedly. Before he could say anything, she shook her head and said, "It's fine. So what if the house is burned? It's fine as long as he's fine." Xiao Chui walked over pitifully and asked, "Young miss, where are we going to sleep tonight?" Li Yi looked at the room that was still burning. The Zeng residence was no longer suitable for people to stay in. It was already so late, and the inns and the like were all closed. Where they were going to stay at night was indeed his expression suddenly froze, and his gaze once again looked toward the few rooms that were lit up by the fire. This fire didn't seem to be that bad after all. Drunken Mo gave it some thought and said, "Let's go back to Willow Alley first. We'll be able to stay there after we get some bedding and tidy up." "Willow Alley?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "Feng's relatives came to the capital a few days ago. It's not convenient for them to stay in an inn, so we let them stay there." "Huh?" Feng looked puzzled. Drunken Mo looked over suspiciously. "Really?" Feng looked at her, then at Li Yi and nodded. "Yes, poor relatives from the countryside. They're not used to staying in inns. Sorry for the trouble they've caused Miss Zeng." With that, he turned and walked outside. Li Yi looked at him and asked, "Where are you going?" Feng did not look back. He waved his hand and said, "I'm going to Willow Alley to remind those poor relatives that the weather is dry, and to be careful of open fires. Li Yi turned his head and looked at drunken Mo and Ruoqing. Since we have nowhere to go now, why don't we? Chapter 954. The atmosphere in the Li family was different from the manners of influential officials outside. The adults had good tempers, and even if the maids and servants accidentally did something wrong, they wouldn't punish them too much. Gradually, the servants also became more relaxed. They would still do what they needed to do, but they would be at ease and wouldn't need to be afraid. There would be great rewards during festivals, and they would even be allowed 2 days off every month. Such a situation was impossible to exist anywhere else in the capital. However, today, everyone was on full alert, not daring to slack off in the slightest. This was the second madam's first day back. If anything were to happen, the adults wouldn't beat or scold them, but they would definitely deduct all their rewards for this month. The maids were busy, occasionally glancing at a certain hall. They had thought that the madam and the second young mistress were already top-notch beauties in the world, but they hadn't expected that the second madam wouldn't pale in comparison. Even Miss Wan, who had come together with the second madam, who might be the third madam, wasn't an ordinary beauty. "Sister, please have some tea." In the hall, drunken Mo held a cup of tea and handed it over to Rui with a smile. Rui put the tea at the side, got up, and took her hand, smiling. "Sister, don't stand on ceremony. Come and sit." Although there was still a ceremony missing, it was just that. The Li family was easy to enter but hard to leave. Once she entered the Li family, she could forget about leaving. What had happened yesterday was actually very simple. Prince Xian had sent people to burn down the Zeng residence, and Willow Alley had been occupied by Feng's relatives. It wasn't a good idea to bring 2 unmarried ladies to an inn in the middle of the night, and it would inevitably attract criticism. Bringing them back home to settle down was the best solution. The old mistress, who had heard the news, had rushed over in a hurry. She had been busy until the middle of the night, and then rested here directly. She had also decided on the date of the wedding at the end of the next month. She had gotten someone to calculate the date in advance, and they had already missed a few auspicious dates. The next suitable date would be next month. Drunken Mo hadn't actually thought of this, but since the old mistress had spoken, she couldn't refute. Thus, she had agreed in a daze, which led to the scene in the morning. What surprised Li Yi was that Ruoqing hadn't rejected moving in with drunken Mo last night. If she hadn't agreed first, drunken Mo probably wouldn't have agreed either. Prince Xian had set the fire. He couldn't even bear to settle the score with him. Feng stood in the courtyard, looking at the 3 women who were whispering in the room. Then he looked at Li Yi and asked in a low voice, "Young master, tell me, did you get someone to set the fire yesterday?" Li Yi frowned at him and asked, "Do I look like that kind of person? You saw those death warriors with your own eyes. Besides, would I let them take such a huge risk?" Old Feng gave it some thought and nodded. He then asked, "Then son-in-law, tell me honestly, is Prince Xian one of us?" Feng's question was a good one. Even Li Yi himself had once had such a question in his mind. "I suddenly can't bear to." Li Yi thought about it and said, "Why don't we just break his 2 legs? You said it was 2 legs last night." 2 legs? The fire in the Zeng residence wasn't a big deal, but it wasn't a small one either. It didn't cause much of a commotion last night, and it didn't cause much trouble during the day either. Of course, some people couldn't hide it even if they wanted to. Sung Shichen walked in anxiously. When he saw Li Yi, he went straight to the point and asked, "How's drunken Mo? Are you injured?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "Only the house was burned. No one was injured." That was the Zeng residence after all. Sung Shichen's face revealed a hint of sadness. He shook his head and said, "It's fine if the house is burned. It's good that everyone is fine." "What about the arsonist? Have you caught him?" He only found out about this in the morning. He came here in a hurry and didn't go to the county office to ask about the situation. Li Yi shook his head. "They're all kamikaze warriors." "Kamikaze warriors?" Sung Shichen frowned. "Prince Xian? Even for the influential officials in the capital, kamikaze warriors weren't easy to nurture. It required a huge amount of resources. Perhaps only those princes would be able to use kamikaze warriors to set a fire. If there were only clues about those kamikaze warriors, it would be difficult to investigate this case. Even if Prince Xian couldn't become the crown prince, he was still a prince. Even if he was found, there wouldn't be any severe punishment. Knowing that Li Yi had his own thoughts on this matter, Zheng Shichen didn't say much. After meeting drunken Mo, he left in a hurry. Not long after, Li Xian and the eldest princess came to visit at the same time. Li Yi said, surprised, "The imperial court assembly is only a few days away. You guys shouldn't be so free, right?" "I already know about the matter." Mingzi looked at him and said, "Even if we manage to find Prince Xian in the end, there probably won't be any results. The imperial court assembly is about to arrive, and many officials have gathered in the capital. You mustn't act recklessly. We'll settle the matter regarding Prince Xian after the imperial court assembly." "Don't worry, I know what I'm doing," Li Yi said, shaking his head. "At most, I'll just burn down his Prince Xian manor." Seeing that both Mingzi and Li Xian were looking at him, Li Yi waved his hand and said, "I'm just joking. It's easy to implicate the innocent by setting a fire. Even if I have to break his 2 legs, I won't do something like setting a fire." "Let's not talk about this anymore." Li Yi shook his head and said, "What about you guys? That matter. How's the preparation?" Li Xian sat down next to him, gulped down a mouthful of tea, and said, "Let's talk about the matter of you setting fire to Prince Xian manor. Do you have enough manpower? Do you need my help? I can get them to scatter kerosene from the sky." In the capital's largest brothel, little Zhu walked over with a teapot, pointed to a young man and said, "Hey, you're called Suzheng, right? Let them rest for a while, and have a cup of water. They'll move it later. There's no hurry." The young man called Suzheng wiped off the sweat on his forehead, smiled and asked, "Miss Little Zhu, where are you guys moving to? Is it the Zheng Manor? I might as well get them to send it over directly." It would have been better if Little Zhu had not mentioned the Zheng Manor. At the mention of the Zheng Manor, a furious expression appeared on Little Zhu's face. She waved her hand and said, "It's not the Zheng Manor. I won't be going there in the future." Suzheng asked curiously, "What happened?" "You don't know. Last night, when we were about to sleep, some bad guys secretly released fire arrows. The entire Zheng Manor's house was burned down. Young Miss and I were both frightened." She patted her chest, looking like she still had lingering fears. "I really can't imagine. If we had all fallen asleep last night, would those bad guys have wanted to burn us to death?" Naturally, she did not know how strong the guards in and out of the Zheng Manor were. Even in the middle of the night, there would still be people on duty. Something like that would not have happened. The Zheng Manor was set on fire? Suzheng was stunned. He lowered his head and asked, "Miss Little Zhu, do you know who set the fire?" "I don't know." Little Zhu shook her head. Then, as if she had thought of something, she said, "I think it was some Prince Xian who sent death warriors. Those people are too scary. They're not even afraid of death." "I heard that too. Sai, since you guys have rested enough, quickly move. Just move it to the horse carriage outside. Don't leave anything behind." "All right." The young man agreed readily. A smile returned to his face, and he waved his hand at the people behind him. "Move quickly. Don't delay the young lady's matters." Prince Xian Manor. What? Only the house was burned? Prince Xian heard this news from a servant. He waved his hand and scolded. "A bunch of useless people. They can't even handle such a small matter. What's the point of living? Your Highness, the guards in the Zheng Manor are too powerful. Not a single one of our death warriors has returned. I'm afraid." Prince Xian waved his hand. "Forget it. Let him be smug for a few more days." In Prince Xian Manor, a person who looked like a steward pointed to a few servants who were moving things and asked, "What are you guys moving?" Chapter 955. From his expression, tone and demeanor, it could be seen that Li Xian was very vexed. In order to fight for the throne, other princes disregarded their brotherhood. They fought openly and secretly, and used all kinds of deadly methods. In order not to be the emperor, he couldn't eat or sleep well. He was so haggard that he was constantly thinking about giving up the throne. If the king of Shu, king of Xian, king of Qi, or any other king knew his thoughts, they would probably strangle him to death. Li Xian, who was in a dispirited state, suddenly raised his head and asked, "Do you have wine?" Since the last incident, Li Yi had stopped drinking. However, the person in front of him was his best friend, and he was willing to risk his life to accompany him. It was nothing to make an exception for once. As the crown prince, the future emperor, of course, he had to use the biggest bowl and drink the strongest wine. Li Yi stood up, waved his hand to the back and said to a servant, "Bring out the best wine in the manor." Soon, a servant came with a jar of wine. Li Yi slapped the lid and poured a bowl for Li Xian and Emingzu respectively. He picked up his teacup and said, "Today there is wine, today we are drunk. Tomorrow's worries will come tomorrow. Let's drink." Li Xian's alcohol tolerance was not much better than his, but after drinking a large bowl of wine, his whole face was a little red, and his eyes were blurred. This bit of wine was naturally nothing to Emingzu. She drank it more easily than he drank tea. Mississippi Lu walked out of the room, and Rui, Zumo, and Ruoqing also followed. Li Xian looked up and saw Zumo and Ruoqing. He said in surprise, "W, when did you come in?" "Just yesterday." Li Yi looked at him and said, "The wedding is at the end of next month. You can't come at that time, but you can't miss the congratulatory gifts." At that time, Li Xian would already be the heir to the Eastern Palace. His status would rise, and so would the gift. "It's your wedding day. How could I not come?" Li Xian glared at him, then turned his head and asked, "How many?" The expression on Li Yi's face froze. He suddenly felt some regret. He should have made do with the grape wine just now. She poured him another bowl of wine and gritted her teeth. "One. Do you really need to go through so much trouble?" Li Xian stood up with a red face. He shook his head and said, "Wouldn't it be better to settle everything at once?" He pointed to the yard and said, "Miss Zuamo, Miss Ruoqing." Then he turned around and pointed. "Your second miss. There's also Emingzu. Tell me, can't you be more straightforward and act like a man?" Li Yi grabbed that bowl, pinched Li Xian's mouth, and poured the entire bowl of wine into his mouth. He then slung Li Xian over his shoulder and said, "He's drunk. I'll bring him to rest. In terms of experience and status, which part of me is inferior to Li Chuang? This throne, why should it be given to him?" In Prince Xian manner, Prince Xian picked up a wine jar. After shaking it a little, he tossed it aside and said loudly, "Go get more wine." In the hall, all the dancers knelt on the ground, trembling with fear. They lowered their heads, not even daring to breathe loudly. Prince Xian was clearly drunk. If they were to infuriate him now, they might even be in danger of losing their lives. Immediately, a servant ran out hurriedly into the wine cellar, picked up a wine jar, and ran out. When he reached the door, he was stopped by someone. He said anxiously, "Quickly make way. This is what His Highness wants. We can't delay it." That servant said in a deep voice, "These are all top-notch strong wines. His Highness has already drunk so much. If he drinks any more, something will happen. If something were to happen to His Highness, none of us will be able to escape." That person's countenance turned pale, and he asked in a trembling voice, Then what should we do?" That servant took the wine jar from him and pointed to another corner. "Take it there. The wine there isn't very strong, so it won't be easy for something to happen." "Many thanks." That person responded, immediately picked up a jar, and ran out. The servant in green placed the wine jar back in its original spot, looked outside and mumbled, "It's going to be dark soon." Li Yi had thought that Zuamo and Ruoqing moving into the house was a joyous occasion. However, by the looks of it now, it did not seem to be entirely the case. He did not know what Rui and Zuamo had talked about for the entire day, but they still wanted to sleep together at night. It seemed that they had a lot to talk about. Since Zuamo and Ruoqing had moved in, Xiaozhu and Xiao Chui naturally had to move in as well. They were different from ordinary servant girls. Like Xiao Huan, they lived in the inner courtyard with Rui and Rui. With this, there were not enough rooms in the inner courtyard. Li lay on the uncomfortable bed in the study, thinking about whether he should go over and deal with Rui and Zuamo since they were sleeping together. Anyway, it was about time. After careful consideration, he still felt that he should not be too complacent. It was not easy to achieve such great progress, and he might not necessarily be able to meet a good person like Prince Exian next time. Although he was no longer complacent, he could not help but feel happy and excited. He lay on the bed, tossing and turning. He did not know what time it was, but he still did not feel sleepy at all. Li stood up, preparing to go to the courtyard to sit, enjoy the wind, and look at the moon. It was better than lying here. The courtyard was very quiet. He walked to the side of the rocking chair and lay down comfortably, placing his hands behind his head. Li Xian was a guy who did not have any tolerance for alcohol. When he was drunk, he would dare to say anything and would never keep his word. Previously, when he was drunk, he had said that he would give the crown prince's consort to him. Until now, he had yet to fulfill his promise. It was the same situation today. If it was not because he had acted fast enough, did he think that he would be able to withstand a few sword attacks from Rui and Emingsu? However, although the situation was not right for him to say those words, his logic was the same. However, there was nothing he could do even if it was troublesome. It was not as if he was going to choose a consort in the future and bring her into the palace after he took a fancy to her. It was something that would happen naturally as their relationship grew. Li gave it some thought and mumbled, Zuemo will be at the beginning of next year. Ruoqing will be a little later. What about Emingsu? Li frowned and said, Emingsu won't be able to do it for now. What about Rui? Li suddenly raised his head and saw Mississippi Lu lying on a thick branch of the tree behind him. Her hands were behind her head like him, and her two long legs were crossed. The bright moonlight shone down. Looking up from below, it was as if her whole body was emitting a faint radiance, full of a holy aura. Rui, what are you doing up there? I couldn't sleep, so I came out to look at the moon. Mississippi Lu floated down from the tree and asked curiously, what did you say about Li Emingsu just now? Li waved his hand and said, she can handle political affairs, but her culinary skills are far from good. She can't even make egg fried rice well. She can't even compare to Ruoqing, and she can't even compare to Drunk Ink. She's not much better than you, Rui. Countless lights flashed in his mind. In an instant, he strung the four names together and heaved a sigh of relief. Mississippi Lu looked at him and didn't say a word. Li raised his head and noticed that her face was a little red, appearing a little charming in the night. It wasn't that she was blushing, but that her face had turned red because of the light. She was looking behind him. Li turned back and saw a beam of red light in the distant horizon. No, it was a stretch of red light. Prince Exian's manor was in a state of panic. There's a fire, there's a fire. Quick, put out the fire. Prince Exian's Highness is still in his room. Someone come quickly. This fire can't be extinguished even with water. This is kerosene. The servants of the prince's manor, who had already fallen asleep, were startled awake by the commotion. When they hurriedly put on their clothes and walked out of the door, what they saw was a stretch of fire that soared into the sky, as well as a crowd that was hurriedly scattering in all directions. In a place where no one noticed, a few figures had their hands crossed over their chests. For Her Highness! For Her Highness! For Her Highness! After exchanging a few words in a low voice, they turned around, passed through the panicking crowd, and went against the flow. Their figures soon disappeared. Chapter 956. Winter in Japan was a time when fires were more likely to break out. The weather was cold, and poor people relied on shivering to resist the cold, while wealthy people used charcoal to keep themselves warm. If they were not careful, it would lead to a great disaster. After the Zheng Manor, Prince Exian's manor also caught fire last night. In terms of scale, degree of destruction, and impact, the former was a far cry from the latter. Not only was Prince Exian's manor burned down, but even the manor's two neighbors were also affected. A few houses in the mansions of two officials in the imperial court were burned down. Thankfully, it was discovered in time, and the damage caused was not great. Prince Exian's manor was in a terrible state. The entire manor was in ruins almost overnight. As for Prince Exian himself, he was also in a sorry state from the fire last night. Although his life was not in danger, his hair was burned. When he was escaping from the house, he tripped over the doorsill and broke one of his legs. He was still lying in the Imperial Physician's Bureau. It was said that the fire in Prince Exian's manor was so great that half the sky in the capital was dyed red. It was also said that when Prince Exian escaped from the house yesterday, he was not even wearing any clothes. It was also said that there was another man who also escaped from the house with Prince Exian, who was also not wearing any clothes. Fong walked over with an aggrieved expression and grumbled. "Young master, why didn't you tell me about such a major matter?" Li Yi was holding a copy of Capital Entertainment. The headline on the front page was about Prince Exian's manor being burned down and Prince Exian seemingly coming out of the closet. He raised his eyes to look at Fong and asked, "What's the matter?" "Burning down Prince Exian's manor." Fong sat down opposite him and said, "Young master, you lied to me, saying that you would only take action after he left the capital. I didn't expect that you couldn't even wait a day. Were you really the one who burned down Prince Exian's manor?" Zheng Shichen hurried in from outside and looked at Li Yi. "You're too rash. No matter what, Prince Exian is still a prince. It's one thing if you wait for him to leave the capital and take action secretly, but you'll make things impossible to resolve. It wasn't me." Li Yi shook his head. He wondered which hero had done a great deed. Although it felt great, it was really baffling that he was the scapegoat. He gave it some thought and said, "Perhaps the people from Prince Exian's manor were careless in keeping themselves warm? Could it be that the people from Prince Exian manor use kerosene for warmth?" Zheng Shichen's countenance turned a little grim. "The surroundings of Prince Exian's room have been doused with a large amount of kerosene. This is clearly an act of arson. If it wasn't because we discovered it in time, Prince Exian would probably have died in the sea of fire last night. If you think about it, you'll know that I'm not the one who did this." Li shook his head and said, "Prince Exian set fire to the Zheng manor. The imperial court can't deal with him, so I'll deal with him myself. However, setting fire to the Prince Exian manor after only one day, this is too obvious. It's like what you've said. I was planning on breaking both of his legs after he left the capital. Now that one of his legs has been broken, I can only break the other two. Are you really going to do it?" Zheng Shichen looked at him in shock, then shook his head and said solemnly, "But the people will not think so. They will only make the simplest guesses. Gossip is a fearful thing." Li put down the limited edition Capital Entertainment in his hand, shook his head, and said, "The people in the capital aren't fools. They'll seek justice for me." "Let's hope so." Zheng Shichen sighed. "The one who is investigating this case is Lu Dayo. He's a meticulous person and should be able to discover some clues." Li Xian and the princess had come together again. Li Yi had already explained earlier, and did not wish to waste his breath. He looked at them and said helplessly, "If I were to say that I have nothing to do with this matter, would you guys believe me? It's him. It must be him." Although Prince Exian's face was no longer as black as before, a large part of his hair had been burnt, and there were still waves of pain in one of his legs. His countenance was savage as he said loudly, "How audacious! He's really audacious. This is the capital, and he set fire to the prince's manor. He's trying to rebel." An official in front of the bed said in a soft voice, "Your Highness Prince Exian, the county office has already sent people to investigate the cause of the fire last night. Please calm down and recuperate in peace." "What's there to investigate? What's there to investigate?" Prince Exian's countenance was infuriated, and he wanted to get up from the bed. However, he accidentally affected his injuries and lay back down. He said loudly, "What's there to investigate? He's taking revenge. He's taking revenge on I for burning down the Zheng manor. Therefore he came to burn down I's manor. So, the arson at the Zheng manor last night was instigated by His Highness Prince Exian." Lu Dayo stood below, holding a small book in his hand. He wrote a few lines of words and said, "I'll report what His Highness Prince Exian has said without missing a single word. What Zheng manor? If I want to burn it, I'll burn it down." Prince Exian waved his hand and said in disdain, "But he's burning down the prince's manor. This is treason and he deserves to have his entire clan executed." After the prince's manor was burned down last night, 4 servants disappeared from Prince Xian's manor. Lu Dao looked at him and said, according to the butler of the prince's manor, these 4 people bought a batch of strong alcohol from outside yesterday. Judging from the situation at the scene, they didn't buy strong alcohol but kerosene. It's the kerosene that burned down the entire Prince Xian manor last night. Prince Xian's countenance changed and he immediately said, what servants of the prince's manor? He must have gotten someone to impersonate them. He wants to get I killed. According to the butler and the other servants of the prince's manor, the 4 of them were brought here by your highness from your feudal land. Before this, they had already been with your highness for 2 years, and have never been to the capital. Therefore, it's impossible for them to be impersonators. Prince Xian was stunned for a moment, and then said furiously, nonsense! How could the servants of my prince's manor possibly commit arson? We'll have to ask His Highness Prince Xian about this. Lu Dao looked at him and asked, Your Highness Prince Xian, why don't you think about it carefully? Before you came to the capital, did you offend anyone? For example, some concubine. What concubine? Prince Xian slapped the side of the bed fiercely and said furiously, the only person I offended is him. It must be him. Lu Dao looked at him and said in a soft voice, Your Highness, please rest well. I'll take my leave. When he walked to the door, he bowed toward a figure who had just entered. Greetings, Your Highness Prince Qi. Brother Qi King. When Prince Xian saw Prince Qi walk in, his eyes lit up and he said, Brother Qi King, you've seen how arrogant and despotic he is. If this person isn't eliminated, the imperial court won't be able to have peace. Prince Qi looked around, and the people in the room who had no business in it immediately left. He walked up to Prince Xian and said in a soft voice, You just sent people to burn down his house the day before yesterday, and he sent people to burn down your prince's manor yesterday. Do you take him to be a fool, or do you take everyone in the world to be fools? Brother Qi King. Prince Xian looked at him in disbelief. Even you. Do you know what the people outside are saying? Prince Qi bent down and said, I heard that the ones who set fire to the prince's manor last night were a few servants from your manor. This trick of yours is too stupid. Prince Xian was speechless. After walking out of the Imperial Physician Bureau, Lu Dao loosened his fists. His palms were covered in sweat. Prince Xian was not scary, and neither was Prince Qi. What was scary was that holy religion, that lady. Before Prince Xian had even arrived in the capital, there were already spies from the holy religion in his manor. Who would dare to say that there were no such people in the other princes, officials and nobles in the imperial court, or even in his own manor? The power of this holy religion had once again surpassed his expectations. For the lady, Lu Dao's countenance was complicated as he mumbled and left quickly. Chapter 957. Holy Religion, Her Highness. Li Yi retracted his gaze from County Magistrate Lu, appearing to be deep in thought. Lu Dao nodded and said, That's right. The servants in Prince Xian's manor have indeed heard those 4 people saying the words for Her Highness. All the evidence shows that the arson case in Prince Xian's manor last night was done by them. Li Yi's gaze flickered. Could it be that the Taoist nun had come to the capital? Thinking about it carefully, he felt that it was not quite possible. The foundation of the holy religion was in the Qi kingdom. Right now, the Qi kingdom was in a state of chaos, with the first prince and the third prince vying for the throne. The Taoist nun shouldn't let go of such an opportunity, let alone come all the way to the Jing kingdom. Moreover, it was true that Fang Xingjian had not received any news regarding this. However, when had Prince Xian offended the Taoist nun? Fang Xingjian had no way of knowing this either. Li Yi knew that there were people from the holy religion in the capital. However, within this organization, it had always been a one-way communication. The members at the bottom of the hierarchy would not be able to come into contact with the core secrets, and it would also be very difficult for outsiders to infiltrate the organization. Even the intelligence department, which had strict control over the organization, knew very little about them. Setting fire to Prince Xian's manor. It could not be ruled out that they wanted to create some big news while the imperial court meeting was nearing. Prince Exian was just lucky to have been chosen by them. No matter what, at a time like this, the authorities would still have to take strict precautions. Li looked at Feng Xingjian, gave it some thought and said, although these people are very well hidden, there will always be some clues. You should pay attention to the cases of people going missing in the suburbs of the capital, or the abnormal movements of some villages. You should be able to discover something. From Li Yi, Lu Dao obtained a lot of information about the holy religion. When he walked out of the Li mansion, he felt as if he had forgotten something, but he couldn't tell what exactly he had overlooked. Although the death of the son of the former assistant minister of the Ministry of Works and the burning of Prince Exian's manor were very far apart, they should have been done by the same group of people. What was their motive? What was the connection between these two cases? Lu Dao rubbed his slightly swollen head. Prince Exian's manor had only been burned down, and no one had died. He had to put this matter aside for now. Quite a lot had happened in the capital this year, and he had to immediately start preparing to report his work at the imperial court meeting. Li Yi didn't think much about the holy religion. Their influence in the Jing kingdom was limited, and the capital was under heavy pressure. After setting fire to Prince Exian's manor, they had already given themselves away a little. If they were to make another move, they would definitely not be able to hide from the imperial court's pursuit. What he should be concerned about was the matter at hand. Although drunken Mo hadn't married into the family yet, she was already the third mistress of the house. For the past 2 days, Rui had been guiding her to familiarize herself with the matters of the house. Today, she was brought over by the old mistress to meet someone. With Rui accompanying her, Mississippi Lu had gone to the alliance, leaving only him and Ruoqing at home. When he sat in the courtyard, Ruoqing brought a cup of hot tea over. Li Yi thought of something and said, if you want to go out or go to the brothel these few days, I'll accompany you. Don't go out alone. Those people from the holy religion were all lunatics. Li Yi was still a little worried that the Taoist nun would make a comeback and lay her hands on the people around him. Although the possibility of this was very low, he couldn't let them take this risk. Ruoqing looked at him with some worry and asked, did something happen? Prince Exian's residence was burned down. It was done by the people from the holy religion. I'm worried that they'll do something bad to you. Holy religion. Ruoqing was stunned and asked with some uncertainty, Prince Exian's residence was burned down by them? Li Yi nodded and said, I don't know how Prince Exian offended their heavenly empress, causing those followers to go crazy and take revenge. But he deserved it, Ruoqing said in a low voice. That heavenly empress should be very powerful. I don't know if she's powerful in other places, but her martial arts are quite powerful. The influence of the holy religion can't be underestimated either. If we were to go up against them, the imperial court would probably have a headache. Li Yi suddenly remembered that he still had the token of the holy sect. It was a token that said that he was under one person, and above tens of thousands of people. If something happened to the Taoist nun one day, after thinking about it carefully, he felt that it was best not to have any contact with those people. Although it was true that the influence was very powerful, all of them had been brainwashed and were like terrorists. Just the thought of being surrounded by such people made him feel uncomfortable. Ruoqing asked in a probing manner, what if the imperial court captures that heavenly empress? There probably won't be a good outcome. Li Yi shook his head and said, the people from the holy religion are cruel, and have probably done a lot of things to harm the imperial court. If the imperial court were to capture their heavenly empress, they'll definitely not let her off. When that time comes, there'll probably be a great commotion in the world. With the Taoist nun gathering such a huge power, no one would believe her if she said that she did not want to rebel. Since ancient times, there had been many such examples. When that time came, blood would definitely flow like rivers and corpses would be strewn all over the place. Ruoqing did not continue asking. She smiled and said, the brothel has been very busy these few days. I'd like to go over and take a look. Since he had nothing to do at home, Li Yi stood up and said, I'll go with you. After sending Ruoqing to the brothel, Li and the sloppy old man found a quiet place to drink tea and watch the performance while waiting for her to finish her business. Miss Wan. Hello, Sister Ruoqing. Nice to meet you, Miss Ruoqing. As Ruoqing walked over, the performers in the brothel all bowed to her. They respected and appreciated her from the bottom of their hearts. She was the one who had changed the industry and allowed them, who had traveled from state to state and slept on the streets, to live the good life they had now. After walking into a room, she ordered, Xiaoqi, go find Su Zheng and ask him to come over. All right, I'll go right now. A young girl nodded and walked out of the door. Su Zheng was also very famous in the brothel. In the beginning, he had only been a beggar, doing some cleaning every day in exchange for porridge. However, because he was serious and diligent in his work, not fearing hardship or fatigue, he was later promoted to work in the brothel as an exception. Many people here knew of him. Not long later, a young man walked in from outside and gently closed the door. He turned around and suddenly knelt on the ground, saying respectfully, Your subordinate pays his respects to the goddess. Ruoqing rubbed the area between her brows and said helplessly, I've already said many times that I'm not your goddess. You've got the wrong person. Su Zheng did not say anything else, but the respect on his face became even more intense. Ruoqing did not argue with him. She stood up, looked at him, and asked, Are you people from that holy religion? It's the goddess's holy religion. She clenched her fists slightly and asked again. Prince Xian Manor, was it you people who burned it? Su Zheng said solemnly, he wanted to harm the goddess, so he must be punished. Her knuckles were slightly white, and her voice trembled slightly. Then, the son of the assistant minister of works, those people, are also. All of them deserve to die for attempting to harm the goddess. Ruoqing sat back down on the chair somewhat weakly. Her face was pale as she mumbled. I'm not your goddess. Why are you? The young man buried his head even deeper and said, Your Highness, the authorities have already noticed our existence. The capital is no longer safe. For Your Highness's safety, this subordinate suggests that we leave this place as soon as possible. Get out. Your Highness, please reconsider. Get out. She had always spoken softly and gently, but at this moment, her tone was so decisive and unquestionable. This subordinate obeys, Su Zheng said respectfully. Without raising his head, he stood up and left decisively. She stared blankly at the empty room, then leaned over the table and sobbed softly. Why me? Why now? I'm not the heavenly empress. When he saw Ruoqing again, Li was startled. He looked into her eyes and asked, What's wrong? Looking at her appearance, it was clear that she had just cried. Ever since he had known Ruoqing, he had never seen her cry over anything. It's nothing. I just read a script. It was too sad, so I couldn't hold it in. She smiled and shook her head. Let's go home. What script? Li asked in surprise. He suddenly felt a warm and soft touch on his hand. He lowered his head to look at it, and subconsciously clenched it. He no longer cared about the script. He nodded and said, Yes, let's go home. Chapter 958. The case of the burning of Prince Xian's manor had exposed certain matters, causing the two yamens in the capital and the city patrol office, which were in charge of security in the capital, to be extremely careful. Fortunately, in the next few days, everything was as calm as before, and no similar malicious incidents occurred. The New Year's Eve dinner of the Li family this year was undoubtedly much livelier than last year's. There was less Lin Wanru, but more Zui Mo and Ruoqing. Lin Wanru would often send letters, mostly about business matters. The Lin family's business was doing very well in the Qi kingdom. Not only did it involve the jewelry industry, but it was also flourishing everywhere. Of course, the Lin family's business was the Li family's business. The two families were mutually beneficial, and it was a symbiotic relationship. When the two girls had just moved in, they were still a little unfamiliar with this place, but a few days were enough for them to familiarize themselves with everything. Even Xiao Chui and Xiao Zhu had gotten along well with the servant girls of the Li family. Xiao Huan also had two more playmates. Usually, the servant girls of the Li family treated her as half a mistress, and they didn't dare to speak or do things too presumptuously. Gradually, she didn't play with them anymore. Friendship between women always came especially easily. Xiao Chui had a strange personality, and it was very easy for people to accept her. In just half a day, the wariness and resistance between the three of them disappeared without a trace. The first day of Jing He's 5th year was the long-awaited court conference. Li Yi woke up very early. This was one of the rare times that he didn't resist going to court, because many major events were going to happen today. Some of them would be earth-shaking to the officials, to the people, and to the Jing kingdom. The sky was still dark. Other than some servants who needed to wake up early, most of the people in the manor hadn't woken up yet. Ruri helped him iron his court clothes. Ruoqing came in with a bowl of porridge and said softly, "Have a bowl of porridge before you go. The court conference will go on for several hours. By the time you get back, it will probably be afternoon. You'll be hungry." Rui walked over and said helplessly, "Miss Ruoqing is a guest. I'm sorry to trouble you to cook personally." Ruoqing smiled and didn't care at all. She said, "It doesn't matter. I'm used to getting up early. I used to make breakfast for Zue Mo and the others first. There's more in the kitchen. When they wake up later, I'll ask someone to bring it over." Li Yi gulped down the bowl of porridge, leaving not a single grain of rice. Ruoqing habitually took out a handkerchief, wanting to help him wipe the rice off the corner of his mouth. She had just raised her wrist when she slowly retracted it. She picked up the bowl, smiled, turned around, and walked out. Rui walked over and helped him wipe the corners of his mouth. She said casually, "Miss Ruoqing is smart and virtuous. She is also a very good woman. In some ways, Ruoqing is very similar to my wife. The most similar thing is that she is virtuous." After nodding, Li Yi looked at the sky and said, "It's getting late." He reached out and pulled Rui into his arms. His lips gently pressed on her forehead. When he turned around, he waved his hand. "It's still early. Go to sleep for a while, my wife. I'm leaving." There was no snow in the winter of Jinghe 4th year, but it was undoubtedly colder than the previous winters. When the sky was slightly bright, the officials had already rushed to the palace gate one after another, ready to participate in this year's grand court meeting. On weekdays, the officials were required to be well-groomed. They couldn't wear too thick clothes under their court robes. Otherwise, they would be caught by the censors. It was unlikely that they would lose their position, but it would be a great humiliation. The morning wind was biting. For the officials who only wore a thin court robe, it was undoubtedly a great torment. Therefore, in front of the palace gate, there were countless officials rubbing their hands and stamping their feet. The censors turned a blind eye to this. After all, if they were to scrutinize them, their almost frozen snot would be considered as not caring about their appearance. Of course, there were also those who weren't cold. When Li Yi came over, he immediately saw the old generals in the crowd who were dressed like bears. The imperial court sympathized with the officials and gave preferential treatment to the elderly. For example, Prime Minister Qin and Prime Minister Shen didn't have to stand there and wait. They could only go in after the officials had entered the main hall. For example, these old generals didn't care too much about their appearance. It wasn't because the emperor was being merciful, but because the censors didn't dare to interfere. "Brat, why are you here so early today? I haven't seen you in court for more than half a year. I thought you wouldn't come today." This time around, Li Yi wasn't as warm to old General Shui. He was almost certain that these old generals were the first to know of the old emperor's decision. For so long, he and Emingzu had been deceived by their superb acting skills. Old General Shui patted his shoulder and sighed. "Sigh, brat, you can't blame us. There's no benefit in knowing about that matter too early." Li Yi shook his head and didn't dwell on this problem anymore. Since things had already come to this, there was no longer any meaning to what had happened in the past. At the very least, that person was Li Xian and not Prince Qi or Prince Xian. Speaking of the King of Qi arrived. Today, the King of Qi was dressed in a particularly spirited manner, brimming with health and vigor. Wearing only a thin embroidered robe, he strode with his head held high, seemingly unafraid of the bitter cold. "Young people are really tough." Old General Shui shook his head and said, "Not like us old fellows. If we were to wear such thin clothes in such weather, We would be in trouble when we return. Old General Ma glanced at him and said, "You can't get hard now because you were the same as him when you were young." Old General Shui was enraged. "Old man Ma, who can't get hard?" Old General Ma said disdainfully, "Why don't you try getting hard? Why don't we have a competition? I'm afraid of you." Out of all the civil and military officials in the imperial court, there were probably only these two who dared to do this openly in front of so many officials. Most of the officials didn't care about who was tougher between the two generals. Their focus was on Prince Qi. "Your Highness, Prince Qi." "Greetings, Your Highness." "Your Highness, please." Prince Qi's arrival caused a brief commotion in front of the palace gates. The censors looked at each other and ignored him. That was then, and this was now. After today, the Prince of Qi would likely become the heir apparent, second only to one. Choosing to offend him at this time was not a wise decision. Prince Qi was beaming with joy. He was very satisfied with the results of his arrival. He liked the feeling of being fawned over by others. Now that the situation was settled, he could finally relax. However, he naturally wouldn't pay attention to those officials whose names he didn't even know. He walked straight ahead. In front of him was where the top officials from the 3 provinces and 6 ministries gathered. "Minister Yan." "Your Highness, Prince Qi." The Prince of Qi cupped his hands towards the Minister of War Yanbing. Yanbing cupped his hands in return, before turning to the Minister of Revenue at his side. With a smile he asked, "Where is the tea house that Lord Qin mentioned last time?" Qin Huan smiled and said, "It's in Willow Alley. If Lord Yan wants to go, why don't we go together after the court today? That would be great." Looking at the 2 ministers chatting happily, Prince Qi opened his mouth and closed it again. A trace of displeasure flashed across his face. Soon, a smile appeared on his face again, and he turned to look at the other people. Before he could say anything, voices came from the crowd. "Ah, Lord Zhang, why do you smell so good? Did you secretly use your wife's perfume? You can smell it too? Lord Wei looks especially spirited today." "Is that so? Is that thing really effective? What is it?" Lord Qi might not know, but Rui Workshop released a new product a few days ago, Rui Dew. It's specially designed for men. It can refresh the mind, adjust emotions, relieve stress, reflect one's taste in life and enhance one's charm. "Is that so? There's such a good thing? I want to try it too." Prince Qi found that he had been ignored again. The officials who had been waiting quietly had suddenly started chatting. He had no way of interrupting them. With a gloomy face he walked to his seat. "Brother Qi." "Greetings, Brother Qi." "Greetings, Brother Qi." Prince Qi was the eldest among the princes, so they all bowed to him. Li Yi glanced at the Prince of Qi, who was surrounded like a moon surrounded by stars. Flabbergasted, he asked, "What are they doing?" Old General Shui said indifferently, "They probably think that Prince Qi already has 1 foot in the East Palace." "Where did you hear this from?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "How strange. How did Prince Qi already have 1 foot in the East Palace? Rumors are harmful." Old General Ma looked at Li Yi and suddenly turned to Old General Shui and said, "Old Shui, I think this kid has some of your demeanor when you were young." Old General Shui was furious. "Ma, how dare you scold me?" Chapter 959. Li Yi felt that he had to improve his judgment of people in the future. He should not make friends with people who were not decent, especially those who were old and frivolous. To discuss who was tougher in front of so many officials, it was clear that he had no sense of shame at all. He was so frivolous that he had no bottom line. It was important not to get too close to such people. Looking at Old General Shui's humiliated expression, Li Yi sighed and said, "I feel that cooperating with the Wang clan in the military provisions business seems to be more suitable. The Wang clan is a big family with a lot of money and foolish people. How about this? I'll give you the dividends that the 2 generals deserve this month. Even if the business doesn't work out, we'll still be able to keep in touch in the future." "Haha, I'm just joking." The military provisions business was a source of income for the clan. Old General Shui's countenance changed, and he put his arm around Feng Xingzhan's shoulder, saying with a smile, Among the younger generation in the capital. No, there's also the older generation. Among them, I admire you the most. We can discuss this. Old fogey Shui, you were scolding me in a roundabout way just now, and now you're sticking to me. Don't you know shame? Old General Ma threw a disdainful glance at old General Shui, walked over, patted Li Yi's shoulder, and said, Li lad, you shouldn't cooperate with an ungrateful person like old fogey Shui for this kind of business. Kick the Shui clan out, and our Ma clan is willing to pay another 10,000 taels. Old fogey Ma, your clan is connected to this business because of me. Now, you want to get rid of me after I've outlived my usefulness? I'm going to kill you, you shameless old fogey. Li lad, don't stop me. Today, I'm going to let old fogey Ma know how many eyes Prince Ma has. Don't worry, I won't stop you. Please go ahead. Li quietly returned to his seat, watching the two of them fight. He unintentionally turned his head and took a glance, noticing that there was a gaze on him. When Prince Exian had escaped from the fire, he had broken his leg. However, it had been reattached by the imperial physicians. Other than some slight difficulty in walking, it was not a big problem. His hair was burned, but when he tied it up and put on the crown, it didn't look much different. At this moment, he was standing among the princes, looking straight at her, not hiding the hatred in his eyes. Li was a little puzzled. Wasn't the one who had set fire to Prince Exian's manor? Wasn't it that fanatical believer of the holy religion? Why did Prince Exian hate him so much? Had he ever offended him? I don't think so. He was clearly not the one who burned his house, yet he was still glaring at him like this. Li glared back with a sharp gaze, and Prince Exian shivered. He could not help but take a few steps back and fall onto the ground. What happened to Brother Exian? Someone hurriedly went over to support him. At this moment, the palace gate suddenly opened slowly. The officials immediately shut their mouths and returned to their original positions. The opening of the palace doors signified the official start of the Grand Court Conference. A middle-aged eunuch walked out from inside and shouted loudly with a sharp and thin voice, "All officials request an audience." Li Yi's position was extremely close to the front among the officials. He walked through the palace gate and passed through a long passageway. Other than the sound of his footsteps, there were no other noises. When he walked into the hall and turned his head to look, the crowd was still so dense that he could not see the end of it. The Grand Court Conference was the one with the highest number of officials participating. Other than the officials and nobles in the capital, the local officials from various places would also be present. This was the only chance for most of them to be present in a year. Rewards, punishments, promotions, demotions, and demotions would all be in this conference. As usual, the old emperor arrived late. Li noticed that the emperor's originally straight back was now completely bent. Rather than saying that he was sitting on the throne, it would be better to say that he was leaning against it. With his current physical condition, it was no longer suitable for him to participate in such an extremely tiring event. However, for an emperor, if he could not even participate in the annual Grand Court Conference, then there would be no meaning for him to be an emperor. Every year, the process of the Grand Court Conference was the same. This year, Emperor Jing did not speak much. Naturally, there were eunuchs who followed the procedure step by step. Other than a few ceremonial contents at the beginning, the one that lasted the longest and had the most people participating was the reports of the local officials and the various departments of the court. The local officials needed to report on the tax revenue, population, economy, education, and other conditions under their jurisdiction. This was related to their promotions and examinations in the coming year. This year, the 6 ministries had vigorously implemented reforms. Naturally, they had to report on the results of this year's reforms. Li Yi patiently listened for nearly 4 hours. The changes that the Jing kingdom had achieved over the past few years could be described as earth-shattering. Regardless of whether it was politics, economy, or military, they had all made significant progress. Of course, almost all of these matters had been decided upon after detailed discussions between him and Mingzhu. Achieving such results was within his expectations. He casually glanced ahead and saw Li Xian in the crowd. Compared with the high-spirited Prince of Qi, Li Xian seemed a little listless. At some point he raised his head and looked at Li Yi. His eyes were slightly empty. Li looked away and no longer looked at him. For Li Xian, this was indeed a cruel thing. However, his identity and status had doomed him to bear this burden. In the world of adults, there was no such thing as easy. Either you change the world or you change yourself. After many officials finished their reports, as usual, they had to announce some major events. This was also what everyone was most looking forward to. All signs indicated that the position of the Eastern Palace would be settled in this Grand Court conference. After the last official retreated, the eunuch looked back. After receiving a signal, he slowly turned his head and said loudly, "Bring the sinners of the Cui family here." In the main hall, the hundreds of officials stepped aside to make a path. They watched as the palace guards escorted a few people up and made them kneel in the hall. They were incomparably familiar with these people, because just a few months ago, these people were just like them, sitting in the same court. Perhaps they had even argued about certain matters, but now, these important figures of the Cui family, who were once extremely powerful, were kneeling in front of them just like that. The eunuch cleared his throat and read, "The Cui family plotted to murder the prince. Their evil intentions are punishable. They brought disaster to the court and caused chaos among the people. Their crimes are too numerous to be listed. If we don't kill such evil people, we won't be able to appease the anger of the people. If we don't kill them, we won't be able to comfort the people. Cui Qingze, Cui Qingming, Cui Qingduo, and 13 others have committed the most heinous crimes. They will be beheaded as a warning to others. Cui Xian will be deprived of the title of imperial concubine. She will live in Yeding forever, and will not be allowed to leave the palace. Cui Ming, Cui Xian, and 26 others will be exiled 1,500 miles. Cui Zheng, Cui Jian. The case of the Cui family, which was tantamount to treason, had already caused a sensation in the capital several months ago. Although it had been quiet these days, everyone could predict the final outcome of the Cui family. But no one had expected that His Majesty would announce the results of the case at the Grand Court Conference. Several important figures of the Cui family could not escape death. Most of the others were also exiled, and would not be able to return to the capital in this life. Imperial concubine Cui was in the cold palace, and would not be able to come out for the rest of her life. Although there was no mention of how to deal with the king of Shu, his actions were already equivalent to defection. Once he appeared, he would definitely be surrounded and suppressed by the court. It was really a pity that the once powerful Cui family had ended up like this. Chapter 960. However, the Cui family had only themselves to blame for such a result, so no one was surprised. Because the crimes they committed were too serious. They plotted to kill a prince, the legitimate son of the emperor. In order to let the king of Shu ascend the throne, they killed the 2 princes of the empress. They didn't stop until the birth of the eldest princess. The empress couldn't bear another child and no one could shake the position of the eldest son of the king of Shu. The Cui family and imperial concubine Cui used such cruel means to ensure that the king of Shu would ascend the throne. They probably didn't expect that the throne would eventually fall into the hands of Prince Qi, who they had never taken seriously. After the eunuch announced the result, the Cui family was taken away. Then, a few dry coughs suddenly came from the hall. The Cui family has committed heinous crimes, and it's not a pity that they finally got such a bad result. Prime Minister Qin walked out of the crowd, glanced down and said, "You all know that the Cui family is insane. In order to establish the position of the eldest son of the king of Shu, they secretly killed the 2 princes of the empress. However, I'm afraid you don't know that the 3rd child of the empress was also a prince, right?" As soon as the words came out, the officials were in an uproar. "What? Prime Minister Qin, are you serious? How is that possible? The 3rd child of the empress is obviously the eldest princess." "Yes, I still remember that the empress and Princess Ning gave birth at the same time. Princess Ning gave birth to Crown Prince Li Xian. The empress. The uproar lasted for a long time. Even the censors did not stop them, because they were deeply shocked and incredulous after hearing Prime Minister Qin's words. Gradually, the uproar subsided. Finally, someone found some clues. The Empress and Princess Ning gave birth at the same time. The Empress gave birth to the eldest princess, and Princess Ning gave birth to Crown Prince Li Xian. Prime Minister Qin said that the Empress actually gave birth to a prince. Prime Minister Shen, the ministers of the 6 ministries, and several other officials in the court looked calm, as if they had already known about it. County Marquis Li and several old generals, who were most trusted by His Majesty, were also not surprised. Most importantly, when Prime Minister Qin said these words, His Majesty did not stop him. Thinking about it, the Empress had lost 2 princes. If His Majesty didn't have any doubt in his heart, it would be unreasonable. Thinking deeper, why did Ning Wangfei come to the capital when she was about to give birth? Why did the Empress also move out of the imperial palace at that time and move with Ning Wangfei? The more he thought about it, the more he thought about it. In the hall, the doubts on the faces of the officials gradually disappeared. The various princes appeared astonished. Prince Xian's countenance turned pale, and Qi King's body trembled, unable to stand steadily. Prime Minister Qin spoke again. Back then, Her Highness lost 2 princes in succession. His Majesty already had some doubts, but the Cui family was powerful. Not only could they stir up the court, but they could even directly intervene in the court. In order to protect the princes, His Majesty made such a decision. His Majesty handed the princes over to Prince Ning, and brought the princess back to the palace. Until now. Prime Minister Qin took out a box from his sleeve and said, "This is the Jade Archive that proves the identities of the 2 princes. If any of you don't believe me, you can come forward and verify its authenticity." Whenever a member of the royal family was born, their identity Jade Archive would be engraved at the same time they were born. If this Jade Archive was really from 20 years ago, then Crown Prince Li Xian was the princes of the first line. What Prime Minister Qin had said would naturally not be false. A few senior officials walked forward. After carefully verifying the Jade Archive, they nodded slightly and silently retreated. At this point, the officials no longer had many doubts. With the deaths of the first 2 princes, His Majesty grew suspicious. In order to protect the 3rd prince, he exchanged him with Ning Wangfei's remaining daughter. Therefore, Crown Prince Li Xian was actually the legitimate son of His Majesty and Her Highness. Princess Royal. It should be called Princess now. At this moment, the eunuch cleared his throat and continued. For the past 3 years, I have been ill for a long time. Thus, all the government affairs have been decided by Emingzu. As a woman, Emingzu has been in charge of the important affairs of the court. She has been working hard day and night, and has never been tired. Therefore, I hereby grant her the title of Princess Yonghua. It was not uncommon for a princess to be granted the title of princess. In the past few decades, there had been a few princesses who had been granted the title of princess due to their favoritism. Putting aside the degree of Princess Mingzhu's favoritism, she had contributed greatly to the court, the people, and the Jing kingdom. A mere title of princess was nothing at all. After reading an imperial edict, the eunuch picked up another one. With a solemn face, he said loudly, "Since ancient times, the emperors have inherited the heavens and ruled the world. They must establish the crown prince and prolong the country. My legitimate son Li Xian is a heroic and extraordinary person. Following the will of the heavens, I hereby abide by the first imperial edict and submit to the public opinion. I solemnly inform the heavens and the earth, the ancestral temple, and the country to confer the title of Crown Prince and appoint him as the Crown Prince in the East Palace. I have been ill for a long time, and cannot be neglected for too long. I hereby appoint the Crown Prince, Li Xian, as the leader, to hold the imperial seal and establish the government hall. Princess Yonghua will be his assistant. The 2 of them will manage the affairs of the commoners and supervise the country. All the matters reported by the officials will be decided by the 2 of them." Thump. As soon as the eunuch finished his words, Prince Qi's face turned pale. He trembled and collapsed on the ground. Then the entire hall fell into absolute silence. Almost everyone had a look of contemplation on their faces. No one spoke. 2 imperial edicts and 3 matters. Princess Yonghua had just become Princess Yonghua, and was given the title of princess by His Majesty. The title remained the same, but the meaning was completely different. Li Xian, the legitimate prince whom His Majesty had entrusted to Prince Ning many years ago, naturally became the crown prince and entered the East Palace. The third matter was also the most important: the crown prince supervising the country, and the eldest princess assisting the government. This was something that had never happened in previous dynasties. It was also the first thing they thought of and felt incredible. But when they thought about it carefully, they felt that it couldn't be more normal. The country and the court had long been inseparable from the eldest princess. If the eldest princess was a man, they would disobey the emperor's order and admonish her to death. They would let her sit in the position that should have been hers. However, she wasn't. This was already the best and most suitable ending. Crown Prince Li Xian was the legitimate prince, and also the most powerful one among all the princes of His Majesty. It was he who promoted the Academy of Science, and made a great contribution to the country. But he only knew science and didn't know how to govern the country. He was not the most suitable person to sit in the position. Someone new. His Majesty gave the princess the title of princess again, so that she could rightfully sit in the position and exercise the power of assisting the government. As for Prince Qi, flushed with success, the horse's hooves were swift. The horse accidentally lost its footing. It turned out that from the beginning to the end, Prince Qi had never touched that position. He didn't do it before and he wouldn't do it in the future. As for why they thought that Prince Qi was already on the throne, Li felt that many people were looking at him with unkind eyes. He felt as if his back was being pricked by needles. He slightly tilted his head and asked the Minister of Revenue beside him, "Lord Qin, why are they looking at me?" Qin Huan looked at him for a long time and finally couldn't help asking, "I'm also very curious. Why did Lord Li accept Prince Qi's gift?" Li thought for a while and said, "He sent it to me. Isn't it a little impolite to return it?" Li did not care about these rewards at all. In fact, he did not even remember what the eunuch had just read. Old foxes, they were all old foxes. He had thought that Li Xian would become the crown prince and then inherit the throne. Who would have thought that something like this would happen? Princess Emingzu had become Princess Emingzu again. Furthermore, she was assisted by Princess Emingzu. What was the difference between this and the past? With Li Xian's temperament, how could he sit still in that position? Even if he were to become the emperor, he would have enough authority to open the door for the Science Academy. He would definitely throw all the political affairs of the court to Emingzu. Anyway, wasn't there an imperial edict? Who was in charge and who was in charge? There was no clear boundary between them. The imperial court meeting was about to end, and only the final ceremony was left. Some of the officials clearly still held quite a bit of resentment toward County Marquis Li. This matter was originally very vague, and no one knew what His Majesty was thinking. Before the imperial court session, they didn't dare to take any rash actions. However, just because County Marquis Li had beaten up Prince Xian and accepted Prince Qi's gift, some people clearly stood on Prince Qi's side. In the end, Prince Qi lost his footing, and they fell miserably as well. Li felt depressed to begin with. Sensing the gazes from the side, he turned his head and said fiercely, "What are you looking at? If you continue looking, I'll dig out your eyeballs." That official's body trembled, and he immediately retracted his neck. After all, the other party had already become the existence with the most profound background in this dynasty. Even the princes could not afford to offend him, let alone them. After the imperial court meeting ended, most of the officials who had come from afar would also go and check on their connections, staying until after the Lantern Festival. The matter of setting up the crown prince wasn't just to be discussed in the imperial court. Such a major matter of the country should be announced to the world. Notices were pasted on the palace walls and city gates. Within a short half a day, everyone in the capital knew about it. The identity of the eldest legitimate son, the secrets of the royal family, the position of the Eastern Palace. These were all topics that the commoners were extremely interested in. Li appeared to be a little dispirited. Right now the situation was set. Li Xian was in charge and Emingzu was in charge. There was no one in the entire Jing kingdom who could stop them from doing what they wanted to do. Without any obstacles or enemies, he seemed to have nothing else to do. He had no interest in the imperial court, and did not wish to be promoted. With his business to this extent, silver was nothing more than a number to him. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he was standing at the peak of his life. If he were to go further up, he might only be able to pull Li Xian down from his position and take it himself. However, this was too easy for him. He didn't consider it. By the way, he also promised Rui that he would go to the Wu Kingdom to see her little disciple, and he couldn't go alone. In the past few years, he had been really tired of staying in the capital. He would take Rui and the others to travel around and see the world. Of course, before that, he had to at least marry Zuemo in a dignified manner. And then Ruoqing. He took back what he had said just now. He still had things to do. Xiaohuan. From the morning until now, he had only eaten a bowl of porridge and was a little hungry. Li Yi habitually called Xiaohuan a few times, only to realize that Xiaohuan, Rui, and Zuemo had gone out in the morning. During the New Year festival, there were some inevitable gatherings and social engagements. In the past, it was Rui who brought Xiaohuan along. As the second madam of the Li family, Zuemo naturally had to go with them this year. Li, what's the matter? Xiaohuan didn't agree, but saw Xiaozhu running out of the room. Go and tell the kitchen to make a few dishes and bring a pot of grape wine. Okay, I'll go now. Xiaozhu responded and ran back in a hurry. Li Yi was startled and reminded her. The kitchen is outside, you're running in the wrong direction. In a clean and tidy room, a beautiful woman sat at the table, slowly flipping through the pages of a book. Sister Ruoqing. The sound of light footsteps came from the door, and the young girl knocked on the door and walked in. Ruoqing put down the book, turned to look at her and asked, "What's wrong?" Xiaozhu rolled her eyes and said, "Li is hungry. He said he wants to eat the food cooked by Miss." Ruoqing got up and walked over, pinched her nose, and said, "He wouldn't say that, it's you who wants to eat it, right?" Xiaozhu smiled embarrassedly and said, "I'm just thinking for him, after all, he also likes to eat the food cooked by Sister Ruoqing." Ruoqing shook her head helplessly and said, "You go play by yourself for a while, I'll go cook." Xiaozhu smiled and nodded. Watching her walk out the door, the smile on her face disappeared, and she sighed, shaking her head helplessly. "My miss is really silly, and Li is also a big idiot. It's obviously a good opportunity for the two of them to be alone, but one of them is reading in the room, and the other is sitting in the yard in a daze. These two people, when will they stop worrying about me? But if it's just eating, it seems like it's still lacking something. Yes, it's lacking grape wine. The weather is cold, and grape wine needs to be warmed before it can be drunk. The Li family has a special wine cellar." Xiaozhu jogged over, and a servant in the room immediately said, "Sister Xiaozhu, what's the matter?" In the hearts of all the servants, Miss Xiaohuan, Miss Xiaochui, and Miss Xiaozhu are all different from the other servant girls, and must be treated with respect. "That your master wants to drink, help me get a jug of grape wine. I'll go get it right away." "Wait a minute." The servant turned around and asked in confusion, "Sister Xiaozhu, is there anything else?" Xiaozhu thought for a moment, and said, "Bring a small jug of strong wine, the strongest kind." Chapter 962. Li Xian succeeded to the throne, and Emingzu assisted him. All the external and internal crises were swept away. After the court meeting, Liu Yi submitted a report, revealing the existence of an extremely terrifying secret force near the capital. It called itself the Holy Religion, and the person who controlled this force was called the Empress. The case of the son of the former assistant minister of the Ministry of Works, and the burning of Prince Xian's mansion, were both the work of this force called the Holy Religion. It was still unknown whether they had committed any other crimes. As for how big this Holy Religion was and the purpose of their existence, no one knew. The court naturally attached great importance to this matter. The officials and nobles of the capital would not tolerate such an unstable factor appearing under the feet of the emperor. The determination of the court could be seen from the fact that the Secret Intelligence Office, Supreme Court, Ministry of Justice, and the two offices of the capital were investigating this case at the same time. This was also the first decree the crown prince made after he became the ruler. If the capital wanted to be stable, the holy religion must be eliminated. Of course, this matter had nothing to do with Li Yi. Li Yi had thought that he would have nothing to do for a long time. He sat in the yard and thought for a while. Only then did he realize that he didn't have to work for them anymore. He still had a lot of things to solve. It wasn't until he smelled a fragrance that he came back to his senses. Seeing Ruoqing put a few dishes on the table, he asked in surprise, "These? Did you cook them yourself?" In fact, this question was unnecessary. The chefs of the Li family couldn't make such delicious dishes. "I have nothing to do anyway." Ruoqing smiled and put the bowl and chopsticks in front of him. Li ran to the kitchen and fetched a bowl and chopsticks for her. He said, "You haven't eaten either. Sit down and eat with us." Only now did he realize that Rui and Zuemo went out today. Xiao Huan and Xiao Chui followed them. Mississippi Lu went to Lu Meng and would come back very late. Only he and Ruoqing were left at home. No, Xiaozhu was also unnecessary. He still had a few scripts to discuss with her. He really shouldn't have wasted time in the yard just now. The dishes cooked by Ruoqing were all his favorites, which made Li Yi feel a little guilty. His taste was similar to drunk Mo's. Both Ruoqing and Rui liked to eat lighter food. Li Yi put down his bowl and chopsticks and said, "These dishes are not enough for 2 people. I'll make a few more." Ruoqing stood up and said, "What do you want to eat? I'll make it." "No need, no need." Li Yi waved his hand and pressed on her shoulder, asking her to sit down. "I'll do it. I haven't cooked for a long time, and my hands are a little itchy." Ruoqing could only nod helplessly. Soon Li Yi walked over with a tray. Ruoqing looked at the 3 extra dishes and a soup on the table, and her heart warmed slightly. Then she shook her head and said, "There are so many dishes. The 2 of us can't finish them all." "The wine is here." Xiao Zhu walked over with an exquisite wine pot in her hand and said, "The grape wine has just been warmed." Ruoqing looked at her and said, "Yuzhu, go to the kitchen and get a set of chopsticks. Come and eat too." Xiao Zhu looked at the delicious dishes on the table and secretly swallowed her saliva. She shook her head firmly and said, "It's okay. I'm not hungry. You guys eat." After saying that, she turned and ran away quickly. Li felt that all the maids he had met were very cute. Xiao Huan was like this, Xiao Chui was like this, and Xiao Zhu was also like this. It seemed that he had to care more about them in the future. Such good girls, come eat more of this. Have you noticed that you've lost weight recently? Li first put a lot of dishes in her bowl, and then he started eating himself. At the door of the kitchen, Xiao Zhu held a cold steamed bun in her hands. She fiercely took a bite and stared in a certain direction. Everyone outside is saying that Crown Prince Li Xian was the legitimate prince back then. Ruoqing suddenly raised her head and said while eating. Li nodded and said, "Yes, they're right. But I should call him Crown Prince Li Xian now. They also say that you and the Crown Prince and Princess are the 3 heroes of the capital. It's because of you that the Jing Kingdom has today. That's all nonsense. You can't take it seriously. You can't take it seriously." Ruoqing smiled and said, "In the future, the Crown Prince will supervise the country and the Princess will assist him. What about you? What are your plans?" Li thought for a moment and said, "I don't have any plans. But when that time comes, I won't have to go through so much trouble. I can live a stable life with you for a long time." The words "with you guys" made Ruoqing's face turn slightly red. Wasn't what she yearned for? Wasn't it a peaceful and stable life? Over the past few days, she had turned around to be her best friend, and turned around to be the person she loved the most. This was already the most stable and comfortable life she could imagine in her entire life. But why did she have to do all those things? She suddenly lowered her head, bit her lower lip, and said, "I have a question to ask you." Li put down his chopsticks and looked at her seriously. Ruoqing was not drunk in Mo, nor was she Rui. She did not have so many tricks and thoughts. If she said she had a question to ask him, then there really was a question. She looked into Li Yi's eyes and asked, "What if someone wants to take drunken Mo away and not let you live a stable life?" "Whoever wants to take drunken Mo, I will break his legs and sink him into the lake of the School of Mathematics." What if their power is very strong? Then I will break all their legs and sink them into the lake of the school of mathematics. If one lake is not enough, I will dig another in the Academy of Sciences next door. If it is not enough, there is also the Women's College next door. What if that person is Crown Prince Li Xian? Li Yi looked at her in surprise, and then said, why does Li Xian want to take drunken Mo? Although he is the Crown Prince, believe it or not, I can still beat him until even his father can't recognize him. Ruoqing was silent. Li Yi looked at her and asked, why you don't believe me? Ruoqing smiled, looked up at him and said, I believe you. It was not that she didn't believe him, but because she believed him too much. She believed that he could sweep away all the obstacles he encountered. She believed that he had such an ability. She believed that he could do anything for drunken Mo, just as she believed that he could do these things for her. Even if they were facing the entire imperial court, the entire world. It was precisely because she believed that she could not let him do that. Li Yi looked at her clenched fists, and a trace of worry appeared on his face. He asked, what's wrong with you? I'm fine. Ruoqing smiled and said, it's a pity that drunken Mo is not here. If she heard these words, she would be very happy. Today, Ruoqing was a little strange. Usually she would not say such strange things. Li Yi could see that she had something on her mind, but since she did not say it, it was useless for him to ask, so he simply did not ask. It was just that in the future, he needed to pay more attention to her. Li Yi brought the warm wine over and poured a glass for her and himself. He said, it's cold outside. Drink a glass of wine to warm up your body. This is grape wine, so it won't be intoxicating. Ruoqing nodded and raised the glass. Li Yi clinked glasses with her and drank the grape wine in the glass in one gulp. Then he looked at the wine glass in his hand and said doubtfully, the grape wine today tastes a little strange, but it's quite delicious. Ruoqing only took a shallow sip and did not notice anything. She said, maybe it's because it's been warmed. Li Yi nodded and filled his glass again. He had not realized before that after the grape wine was warmed, the taste was even more mellow. In the future, he could drink it warmly. In the kitchen, Xiaozhu finished eating the cold steamed bun and poured half a bottle of grape wine into half a jar of strong wine. She dipped her chopsticks and put it in her mouth, then smacked her lips. Half a bottle of grape wine and half a jar of strong wine tasted quite good. It not only retained the sweet taste of the grape wine, but also made the wine not so strong. This was not a strong wine that intoxicated people, but it was an intoxicating grape wine. In addition, it was not the wine that intoxicated people, but the heart that intoxicated them. There was only so much she could do for them. Chapter 963. It's really strange. Li Yi put down his chopsticks and rubbed his eyebrows. Today, Ruoqing was strange, even the grape wine was strange. Usually he didn't feel anything after drinking a whole pot, but today his head began to feel a little dizzy after drinking half a pot. Ruoqing also put down her chopsticks, looked at him, and asked doubtfully, what's strange? Li Yi looked at her and asked, don't you feel that this wine is a little strange? Ruoqing shook her head. She only drank 2 cups and didn't feel anything unusual. I'm full. I'll go back to my room and rest for a while. It was nothing to drink poorly, but it was a bit shameful to get drunk after drinking grape wine. Li Yi stood up, but his body couldn't help shaking. Ruoqing hurriedly stood up, supported him and asked worriedly, is there anything wrong with your body? Li Yi shook his head. I just feel a little dizzy. I'll be fine after a sleep. Let me help you back to your room to rest. Li Yi did feel a little dizzy, but he didn't refuse. In the past, unless he drank the strongest wine, he wouldn't feel this way. Could it be that his insignificant alcohol tolerance was showing signs of regression? Ruoqing helped him back to his room and covered him with the quilt. Then she closed the door and slowly retreated. After cleaning up the mess on the table, when she returned to her room, she found that her door was closed from the inside. Xiaozhu, are you in there? No one would enter her room except for herself and Xiaozhu. Xiaozhu liked to sleep on her bed. In the past, when she was reading, She would sleep on her bed if she was bored. After knocking on the door several times, there was still no sound from inside. She thought that she should be asleep, so she didn't disturb her again. The door of Xiaozhu's room was locked from the outside, and the door of Zui Mo's room was the same. She had to walk back to that room again. In Ruoqing's room, Xiaozhu lay on the bed, shaking her legs and murmuring, "Sister, sister, it's up to you next." In Li Yi's room, Ruoqing covered the quilt that had been kicked aside by him and slowly sat down on the bed. She lowered her head to look at this extremely familiar face, and her gaze did not shift for a long time. At the entrance of the mansion, the two servants of the Li family bowed and said, "Second Mississippi." Mississippi Lu walked into the courtyard and went straight to the kitchen. This was a separate kitchen in the courtyard. As usual, she found warm food. There were dishes and wine. She curled her lips. He didn't even know how much he could hold his liquor, yet he drank such a strong liquor. She picked it up and weighed it in her hand. There was only half of it left, enough for him to sleep until tomorrow morning. He picked up his chopsticks and picked up a few mouthfuls of food. Then he picked up the wine jar and took a gulp. His brows furrowed as he looked at the wine jar in his hand, deep in thought. It wasn't hard liquor. It tasted like grape wine, but not entirely. Surprisingly, it tasted pretty good. After finishing half a jar of wine, Zhang Xian walked out of the kitchen. Seeing that the door was open, he walked over leisurely. At this time, I don't have to go through so much trouble. I can live a stable life with you for a long time. In the room, Ruoqing stared at him for a long time. Thinking of what he had just said, a smile appeared on her face. She slowly reached out and touched his face. What she wanted to live was a stable life with him, Zuemo, and Xiaozhu. No one or anything could be an obstacle. She gently held Li Yi's hand. At this moment, the delicate temperament on her body disappeared without a trace. She leaned down and kissed him lightly on the forehead. Then she stood up and turned around. She turned around and saw Mississippi Lu standing at the door. There was no panic or shame on her face. She walked over unhurriedly and whispered, "He's not feeling well. Let him have a good rest." After that, she walked out of the door. Mississippi Lu looked back and walked into the room. She came to the bed, lowered her head and sniffed. Her beautiful brows furrowed. Did he think he wouldn't get drunk by mixing grape wine with hard liquor? He wasn't on guard at all. Didn't he know what he looked like when he was drunk? When she saw the light lip mark on his forehead, she was infuriated. In addition to that Zuemo, there was also Miss Ruoqing, Li Emingzu, and she really wanted to cut open his chest and see how his heart was made. Why could it hold so many people? After covering him with the quilt, she was about to turn around and leave when her wrist was suddenly grabbed. "Rui, do you know that I'm very worried about you?" Mississippi Lu turned around and looked at his eyes that were still closed. At this time, she was not worried that he would lie to her. She asked with interest, "Worried about me?" "Worried that you can't get married." Li Yi murmured, "Although you are beautiful, your temper is too bad. Which man dares to marry you?" The smile on Mississippi Lu's face became even brighter. "What did you say just now? Say it again?" "Don't worry." Li Yi waved his hand casually and said, "If no one wants you in the end, don't forget that you still have me." Her wrist froze and she suddenly shook off his hand. A trace of panic appeared on her face as she looked down at him. "Don't forget that you still have me. I don't want you either. Ha ha ha. Who told you to always beat me?" A trace of pleasure appeared on the face of Li Yi, who was sleeping soundly. Mississippi Lu took a deep breath, turned around and strode to the door. She did not go out but closed the door. In the courtyard, Xiaozhu's eyes widened and the bun in her hand fell to the ground. It's over, it's over. Miss, why don't you know how to cherish it? Such a big bargain, and you just gave it to someone else. At the brothel. Miss Ruoqing. Miss, these are the new books I've collected these days. I'll give them to you later. Sister Ruoqing, last year's accounts, I've put them on your table. Wan Ruoqing nodded and smiled at everyone she met. She passed through the brothel and walked into a room. Brother Su, ask someone to move these props to the other side. All right. Brother Su, my wife is going to give birth tonight. I'll have to trouble you to help me after work. No problem, Brother Wang. Don't worry, I'll be here. Su Zheng was busy inside and outside the hall. A young girl walked in and said, Brother Su, Sister Ruoqing is looking for you. Su Zheng turned around and smiled. Got it. I'll be right there. He put down the work in his hands, washed his hands, tidied his clothes and walked out of the door. He warmly greeted everyone he met along the way. He came to a room and lightly knocked on the door. Come in. A woman's voice came from inside the room. Su Zheng walked in and closed the door. He respectfully knelt down. What orders does Her Highness have? Wan Ruoqing looked at him and asked, How many followers of the holy religion in the Jing kingdom? Su Zheng respectfully replied, Her Highness, the foundation of the holy religion is in the Qi kingdom. There are about 100,000 followers, and there are about 10,000 followers in the Jing kingdom. Among them, there are about 300 elites who stayed in the capital to follow Her Highness. The rest are ordinary followers, and there are about 2,000 of them. The elites of the holy religion? There are more than 300 people? Her Highness, there are more than 300. It's just that most of the elites have followed another Her Highness to the Qi kingdom. The rest are all developed by me in the past 2 years. Another Her Highness. Wan Ruoqing looked at him, and thought for a moment. Then she said, There is only one Her Highness in the holy religion. Su Zheng was stunned. After a while, he knelt on the ground and said respectfully, There is only one Her Highness in the holy religion. Chapter 964. Wan Ruoqing stood up, looked at him and said, Before you recognize me as your empress, I want to make 3 rules. Su Zheng said respectfully, Your Highness, please instruct us. First, all the followers of the holy religion are not allowed to kill or do evil. Without any hesitation, Su Zheng nodded and said, I will definitely pass on Her Highness' teachings to every disciple. Second, you are not allowed to call me empress in public. Su Zheng nodded. I will inform all the members of the church today. Third, all the followers in the capital must evacuate within 2 days. This time, a look of hesitation appeared on Su Zheng's face. But, Your Highness, the imperial court is currently investigating the matter of our holy church. If all of our followers are evacuated, what about your safety? Wan Ruoqing shook her head. You don't need to worry about my safety. If there is a day when you need to worry, you can't do anything. Su Zheng looked solemn. Your Highness, you won't go with us? Wan Ruoqing smiled. I won't go. Your Highness, if you still recognize me as your empress, do as I say. Su Zheng's face showed an extremely conflicted expression. After a moment he bowed his head. I will obey. What, still no harvest? Li Yi took a sip of grape wine, casually asked Li Xian. He looked at the clear wine in the cup, feeling strange. The grape wine that was warmed by others was completely different from the one that Xiaozhu warmed last time. These days he tried several methods to warm it, but they were all far from the last time. It seemed that he had to find time to ask Xiaozhu for advice. There is no harvest. All the clues are broken. Li Xian was not in a good mood. This was the first case he handled after entering the East Palace. It was of great significance. If he messed it up, the crown prince would lose face. As the left emissary of the holy religion, Li Xian and Li Xian discussed the issues of the holy religion face to face, which made Li Yi feel a little strange. Being a spy to this extent was probably the pinnacle of what a spy could achieve. There were some clues at first, but when we followed the clues, all the people related to it had mysteriously disappeared. All the clues ended there. Li Xian shook his head and said, It would be great if we could find their empress. She is the most important person in the holy religion. Putting aside the fact that the Taoist nun was currently in the Qi kingdom, even if she was really in the capital city, ordinary people would not be able to do anything to her. Ruoqing came over and refilled their teacups. In the past, Li Yi did not notice it, but after the busy new year, he found that there seemed to be a shortage of maids in the family. He should recruit a few more. At this time, Uncle Li came in from outside. Li Yi waved to him and said, Uncle Li, recruit a few more maids in the next 2 days. There are not enough people in the family. Ruoqing thought for a while and suddenly said, "There is no need to go through so much trouble. There are many sisters in the brothel. They are clean and diligent. Why don't I pick a few of them and bring them here?" "That's good." Li nodded. Suddenly, Li Xian thought of something and suddenly said, "Today, the Secret Intelligence Unit caught an ordinary believer of theirs. He was originally a farmer in the suburbs of the capital city. I don't know how he became a believer of the holy religion. I don't know if we can get information about the Empress from him." Ruoqing finished pouring tea and left. Li Xian took a sip of tea and stopped talking about the holy religion. He looked back and asked, "Miss Ruoqing, when do you plan to marry her?" Li looked up at him and asked, "What about you? You are going to be the emperor soon, but you only have one empress. How many more do you plan to marry?" Li Xian looked at him with slight disdain. "It is enough for me to have Qin unlike you. Make a bet? Don't be too confident." Li Yi was waiting for the day when he would slap his own face. "Sure, I am not afraid of you." No one expected that there was such a huge and terrifying force under the feet of the emperor of the capital. Last time, dozens of powerful officials were kidnapped, and the entire upper class of the capital was purged. With great difficulty, they finally settled down and allowed the majority of people to have a good night's sleep. In the blink of an eye, such a thing had happened. Many people, before they went to sleep, worried that someone would set them on fire after they fell asleep, or that someone would slit their throat in their sleep. The officials and nobles of the capital strongly condemned this extremely vile behavior, and urged the relevant departments to solve the case as soon as possible, so that the capital could see the light of day. The Ministry of Justice, the Secret Intelligence Unit, the Supreme Court, and other departments working together to solve the case were quite efficient. In addition, because the ordinary believers of the holy religion did not have a firm will, the court finally obtained a key piece of evidence: the portrait of the Empress. Whether or not the portrait was similar was not an easy task. In the vast sea of people, finding someone with a portrait was not an easy task. But at least there was a new clue, and this was already a breakthrough. Rui took Zue Mo to attend various occasions, and Mississippi Lu went to Lumeng. These days, only he and Ruoqing were left at home. When he had nothing to do, he would sometimes play chess with her and discuss the script to kill time. Li Yi casually placed a chess piece down and muttered, "It's useless even if we find the portrait. That Taoist nun is now in the Qi kingdom. Even if we take 10,000 steps back and assume that she's in the Jing kingdom, we won't be able to capture her unless we send out a few grandmasters at the same time." "Not necessarily." Ruoqing shook her head and said, "Maybe their empress is someone else. Besides the Taoist nun, who else was the empress? If Li Yi could get this wrong, wouldn't he have been kidnapped for nothing last time?" Ruoqing put down a chess piece and suddenly looked up at him. She said, "Actually, I have something to hide from you." Li Yi was shocked and asked, "Could it be that you and Zue Mo really?" Ruoqing looked at him seriously and said, "Actually, I am the empress they are talking about." Li Yi was relieved. It was not a big deal. He thought that Ruoqing and Zue Mo were hiding it from him. He looked at Ruoqing and said seriously, "Actually, I also have something to hide from you." Ruoqing looked at him. Li Yi looked at her and said slowly, "Actually, I am the left emissary of the holy religion. My status is only below the empress." "I don't even know that you are the empress," he smiled and said. "When did you learn from Zue Mo? You also like to make this kind of joke." "I am not joking." Ruoqing shook her head and said, "The holy religion only has the right emissary, not the left emissary." Li Yi put down the chess piece that he had picked up. After a moment of shock, his face showed doubt and disbelief. He asked, "What is going on?" "I don't know either." A trace of helplessness appeared on Ruoqing's face. "I don't know either. How did I become their empress?" Li Yi finally remembered something. It was something that he had almost forgotten. It was the painting that the man in blue showed him when he was brought to Shuzhou by the Taoist nun. "So, the death of Li Jianren and the burning of Prince Xian's residence were all done by them for you?" Ruoqing nodded. Li Yi suddenly smiled and shook his head. He looked at her and said, "As the empress, you don't even know how many emissaries there are in the holy religion." He turned around and opened a cabinet in the room. He took out a jade tablet and walked over to put it on the table. I am not joking either. He looked at Ruoqing and knelt on one knee. He said solemnly, Azure Dragon Emissary Li Yi pays his respects to the Empress. Chapter 965. The Holy Religion only had the right emissary, the White Tiger Emissary. Although the left emissary, the Azure Dragon Emissary, had a name, there was no such person. This was what Su Zheng told her when he introduced her to the matters of the Holy Religion. He also told her how to identify the emissaries of the Holy Religion. She picked up the jade token and looked at it. There were words on the front and a picture of the Azure Dragon on the back. There was a small dent in the middle. This was undoubtedly the token of the Azure Dragon Emissary of the Holy Religion. In other words, he did not lie to her. He really was the Azure Dragon Emissary. Before he knew that she was the Empress, he was already the Azure Dragon Emissary. She suddenly felt wronged. When she was the happiest and happiest, she inexplicably became the Empress of the Holy Religion. She inexplicably became the wanted criminal of the Imperial Court. She inexplicably became the main culprit who might implicate him and disrupt their lives. These days she did not sleep at all. In these days she made many important decisions in her life. She changed so much that she could not even recognize herself. Because she did not know that she was not the only empress in the family. The Azure Dragon Emissary of the Holy Religion was also by his side. Why? Why didn't he say so earlier? If she knew that he was the same as her, how could these few days have happened? But the next moment, her heart was filled with joy and happiness. So he was the same as her. They were the same. She was not alone. Looking at Ruoqing, who was stunned and had a complicated expression, Li Yi waved his hand in front of her eyes. Ruoqing, Ruoqing, Empress. Ruoqing suddenly looked up at him and said, I want to bite you. Ah. Li Yi was stunned. At this time, Ruoqing had already stood up and walked over. She grabbed his arm and bit down. She did not bite hard, but it was not light either. After a while she let go. 2 rows of shallow teeth marks appeared on Li Yi's arm. This was not fair. Although he did not tell Ruoqing that he was the Blue Dragon Envoy, Ruoqing did not tell him that she was the Empress. Why was she the one who bit him? Forget it, I'll get my revenge later. Let's forget about it for now. We're on the same side anyway. It doesn't matter if he bites my arm or any other place. Li Yi stretched out his other hand and said, Have you calmed down? Do you want another bite? I can't stay here anymore. This was the first time she had done this to Li Yi. She blushed and lowered her head. No. Li Yi shook his head without any hesitation. Let me finish first. Ruoqing looked at him and said, They have already got my portrait and should recognize me soon. At that time, you and Zuma will not be able to get away from it. Even if His Highness the Crown Prince and the Princess believe you, there are still the civil and military officials in the court, and the nobles in the capital. So I must leave. Li Yi smiled and said, You know, the civil and military officials in the court and the nobles in the capital. I don't care about these things. I care. Ruoqing looked at him and said seriously, Believe me, I can handle this matter. How do you want me to believe you? Li Yi sighed and said, If you run far away, where can I find you? Ruoqing shook her head and said, I won't run far. How can I believe you won't run far? Li Yi shook his head. With his previous understanding of Ruoqing, in order not to affect him, she would definitely run far away. Although he was a little surprised that she told him this time, it was better to be safe than sorry. Ruoqing suddenly took a step forward and gently hugged him. She put her cheek on his chest and whispered, Because I like you. How can I bear to leave you? Li Yi's mouth opened slightly and he was stunned in place. Was this a confession? Not counting that Tsundra Loli, this was the first time in his 2 lives that a member of the opposite sex had taken the initiative to confess. But how could this person be Ruoqing? Shouldn't this kind of trick be used by the domineering female alliance leader, or the domineering empress? Could it be that Ruoqing had successfully evolved from a passive, accepting daughter of a humble family to a domineering queen who took the initiative to attack? Li Yi reached out and hugged her. He felt an indescribable pain in his heart. Just what kind of mental journey had she experienced in these past few days for her to change so much? There was no response for a long time. Ruoqing raised her head, and a trace of panic appeared in her eyes. She whispered, "Why aren't you saying anything?" Li lowered his head to look at her and said, "You've said all the things I should have said. What do you want me to say?" Hugged. Outside the room, a figure hiding in the bushes clenched the binoculars in his hands and whispered, "Kiss kiss, yeah. Success." Li suddenly realized something. The Empress of the Holy Religion was actually Ruoqing. Together with his Blue Dragon ambassador, this holy religion belonged to his family. Ruoqing was a queen, and so was the Taoist nun. It could be considered a tie. The White Tiger ambassador was one level lower than him, and his side was slightly better. In this case, why did most of the followers of the holy religion listen to them? This was a bit too much. No one could rob the Li family's things, not even a guru. What belonged to him had to be taken back sooner or later. Su had coveted the Taoist nun for a long time. Judging from the frequency of his second granduncle's abuse, the next time they fought, he would definitely be able to easily teach the Taoist nun a lesson. Chapter 966. If you don't want to try, then don't try. Why are you looking at me like that? When she was young, she often left bite marks on her wrist, and then used a ballpoint pen to draw on the hands to make it look like a wristwatch. It was normal for her to bite herself. Ignoring the second miss, he walked back to his room and saw Xiaozhu and Xiaochui playing in the yard. Li stopped. After some thought, he waved her over. "Xiaozhu, come here. I want to ask you something." A government office somewhere in the capital. Several officials in charge of the holy religion case were gathered together. They looked at a portrait spread on the table, frowning. Li Xian walked in from outside. He glanced at everyone and asked, "What did you see? Tell me." This case had been dragged on for a long time. It had used up what little patience he had. He was still waiting for the case to end so he could discuss a scientific problem with Shen Shu. Speaking of which, it had been a long time since he had seen Shen Shu. The Supreme Court official said helplessly, "Your Highness, let's not talk about the authenticity of this portrait for now. It will be difficult for us to find the Empress with just this portrait. This portrait has been plastered all over the streets and alleys of the capital, but we haven't found anything yet." On the other side, Governor Lu Daya was deep in thought. He felt that he had seen the Empress in this portrait before, but he couldn't remember where he had seen her before. Annoyed, he picked up the file again and flipped through it. "All right, hurry up." Li Xian waved his hand. Just as he was about to walk out, he glanced at the portrait on the table and stopped. He walked back and looked at the portrait on the table in a daze. Lu Daya put down the files of the two cases. As if realizing something, he walked over quickly and looked at the portrait on the table. The next moment, Li Xian put the portrait away. "Your Highness, you." The officials were confused. "I will take this portrait back and study it carefully. You are dismissed." He waved his hand, picked up the portrait and left. All of the officials looked at each other in dismay. There was only a single original painting of the Heavenly Empress, and they couldn't even find the person based on the original painting, much less the painter who had copied it. Just what did the Crown Prince want? Lu Daya walked out in a daze. He was thinking about something that he had just figured out. It turned out that Li Jianren's death and the burning of Prince Xian's manor were not unrelated. Li Jianren wanted to harm Miss Ruoqing, so the people of holy religion sent him straight to hell. Prince Xian burned down Miss Ruoqing's residence. Therefore, his Prince Xian manor was also burned down by the people from the holy religion. These two seemingly unrelated cases were closely linked because of one person. Only Miss Ruoqing was the Empress. How was this possible? Li Yi took a sip of wine and decided to promote Xiaozhu to be his personal wine warmer in the future. The grape wine that she warmed tasted different from others. It was at this moment that the slightly absent-minded Li Xian walked in from outside. Li Yi poured him a cup of wine and said, "What's wrong? Isn't Emmings the one handling the matters of the court? Why do you look so glum?" After Li Xian sat down, he sighed and handed the portrait to him. Li Yi opened the portrait and stood up abruptly, glaring at him and saying loudly, "Speak. Why is Ruoqing's portrait with you? You already have the crown prince's consort and Xinshu. Could it be that you still have designs on her? Are you still human?" The drawing skills of this portrait were not very good and ordinary people might not be able to recognize it. However, how could he not recognize it after spending so much time with Ruoqing? Xinshu. Li Xian was startled. "That's not important." Li Yi waved his hand. "Why do you have Ruoqing's portrait?" Li Xian shook his head and looked at him saying, "This portrait is of the Empress of the Holy Religion." Li Yi looked at the portrait again and asked, "Did you take the wrong one? There are people who look so similar in this world." At this moment, Fong hurriedly ran in from outside and said anxiously, "Son-in-law, bad news. Miss Ruoqing has disappeared." Li Yi was startled. Although Ruoqing did not tell him her plan, he did not need to worry about Ruoqing leaving. Pretending to be surprised, he asked, "What happened?" The people who were protecting Miss Ruoqing were all knocked unconscious. When they woke up, Miss Ruoqing had disappeared. Fong anxiously said, "Son-in-law, don't worry. I have already sent people to look for her." Li, bad news. Xiao Zhu frantically ran out from Ruoqing's room and handed a letter to Li Yi. Wiping away her tears, she said with a sobbing voice, Miss has left." Li Yi opened the letter. In the letter, she explained in detail how she became the Empress. Although this was not her original intention, in order to not implicate him and the Li family, the best way was for her to leave. Li Yi put down the letter and slowly sat down. After Li Xian looked over, his complexion changed. He shook his head and said, I didn't know. If I knew, I wouldn't have let them investigate." Xiao Zhu hugged Li Yi's arm and said with a sobbing voice, "Li, what do we do? What do we do now?" A servant of the Li family came over and said in a low voice, "Marquis, a lord from the Ministry of Justice has come to visit." Li Yi waved his hand. "Let him in." "Greetings to your highness, greetings to Lord Li." An official from the Ministry of Justice came in and respectfully bowed. Li Xian was annoyed. He glanced at him and asked, "What's the matter?" The official looked up and said in a low voice, "Your Highness, our people have just found the identity of the woman in the portrait." However, the Empress and County Marquis Li. "What do you mean?" Li Xian said coldly with a sullen face. "What are you people from the Ministry of Justice doing? If he says it's the Empress, then it's the Empress. Can't you use your brain to think about it? Go back and investigate it seriously." After being scolded by the Crown Prince, the official from the Ministry of Justice could only nod his head in agreement and leave helplessly. Li Xian looked at Li Yi and said worriedly, "Don't worry, I will order people to find Miss Ruoqing." Li Yi waved his hand. "No need. In any case, she is the Empress of the Holy Religion." No. Li Xian shook his head repeatedly. "Didn't you say last time that the Empress of the Holy Religion is that Taoist nun? How can there be two empresses? What happened to Miss Ruoqing was a misunderstanding. I will order the Taoist nun to be wanted in the whole Jing Kingdom." Li Yi shook his head and said no more. Li Xian said solemnly, "I will go back and order it now." Li Xian still had a worried look on his face when he left the Li residence. At this time, the Holy Religion was not the thing he was worried about. Miss Ruoqing had left. According to Li Yi's character, he would not let it go. If he left with her, there would be no meaning in the capital. In the yard, Fong looked at Li Yi, who was calmly drinking grape wine, and asked, "Young master, Miss Ruoqing is the Empress of the Holy Religion. Aren't you surprised?" Putting aside the fact that Miss Ruoqing had suddenly become the Empress, she had disappeared just like that. Young master's reaction should not be like this. So what if Ruoqing is the Empress? Li looked at him and said, "I'm also the Azure Dragon Envoy of the Holy Religion. Have I ever shown off before?" The matter regarding the Holy Religion, which had caused a great commotion in the past few days, had yet to subside when another wave of commotion broke out in the capital. Prince Xian, who had already left the capital, had met with a group of thugs on his way to his feudal land. Not only had his group been robbed, but even Prince Xian had been beaten up by them. Therefore, Prince Xian, who had just left the capital, was carried back again. It was verified that the group of thugs were the believers of the holy religion. Although Prince Xian had met with an unexpected misfortune, those people had at least left the capital. While strict orders were given to investigate those thugs, all the influential officials in the capital were finally at ease. They had finally left. As for whether the empress of the holy religion was the Taoist nun who was wanted or someone else, or whether she was related to County Marquis Li, the imperial court had not come to a conclusion. They could not tell if it was real or fake either. However, since the crown prince and the princess did not care, they could not say anything else. It was fine as long as they were no longer threatened by those people in the future. Although the Ministry of Justice and the other government offices had investigated some things, they were unable to verify that the lady had disappeared from the capital. The crown prince had the intention to close the case, and had even given them a death order. To them, this was also a good thing. Who would dare to go to County Marquis Li's place to investigate the case? Li Manor. Drunken Emo looked at Li Yi and asked with a burning gaze, "Where on earth did Sister Ruoqing go?" Li shook his head and said, "I really don't know. A few days ago, her portrait was pasted all over the capital. She definitely can't appear now. You must know something." Drunken Mo's expression was one of disbelief. She shook her head and said, "If Sister Ruoqing really went missing, you'll go crazy from anxiety. How would you be in the mood to drink grape wine here? Look into my sincere eyes." Li held her face and looked at her, saying, "I'm not lying to you. I really don't know where she is." Drunken Emo pushed his hand away, feeling less nervous. Although she was still very curious as to why Sister Ruoqing had become the empress, what was more important was that she was safe and sound. It was because if something were to really happen to her, a certain someone would be much more anxious than her. Li Yi saw Uncle Li walking past in a hurry and asked, "Uncle Li, where are you going?" Caretaker Li came back and stood at the door saying, "Didn't young master say that there's a lack of manpower at home, and that you need to pick a few more maids?" Miss Ruoqing picked a few from the brothel. "Now that they're all here, I'll go take a look." Chapter 967. Compared with powerful officials of the same level, the Li family did not have many servants. This was because all the masters in the family did not have the habit of having servants serve them. However, there were still maids who were responsible for cleaning the room and serving tea to the guests. Ever since Zumo and Ruoqing moved in, the family seemed to be lacking in manpower. Before Ruoqing left, he picked a few diligent sisters from the brothel who had clean backgrounds. He knew them well, and did not have to worry about anything else. Butler Li stood in the yard and looked at the few women standing in a row. He said solemnly, "This is the marquis of our family. Open your eyes and look carefully. Don't mistake the master in the future. I will take you to see Madam later." He and Ru Yi didn't usually scold the servant girls. Uncle Li was the one who played the role of the bad guy. In his words, servants should act like servants. Even if the master was benevolent, the servants couldn't know what was good for them. The new maids needed to establish their authority. After saying this with a straight face, Uncle Li waved his hand and said, "Okay, starting from the far left, introduce yourselves one by one." "My name is Xiao Qiu," a maid said timidly. "My name is Xiao Rong." Another maid stood up. "I am Xiao Ro." I am Xiao Dai." There were a total of 5 maids who entered the mansion this time. They would be taken to see Rui and Zumo later. Li Yi's gaze swept over them and moved to the last woman in white. The woman smiled and bowed slightly to him. "Xiaoqing greets the marquis." Uncle Li turned around and said with a smile, "Young master, I will take them to see Madam and second Madam." "Wait, I still lack someone to grind ink in my study." Li thought for a moment and looked at the maids again. He pointed casually and said, "Xiaoqing." Uncle Li looked at him in surprise. Young master's study had long been taken over by the second miss, and the thing he usually did was bask in the sun in the courtyard. It was understandable that he lacked a servant girl to massage his shoulders and legs, but what kind of ink was he grinding for? However, the entire Li family was his. It was naturally not a problem to have a maid. Uncle Li looked at her and said, "Xiaoqing, then you will follow the marquis from now on." The woman lowered her head and bowed again. Yes. This winter, it was likely that it would not snow at all. As the Lantern Festival approached, the weather began to warm up. By noon there was not much chill. Yongning and Shanning took off their thick fur coats and played on the lawn. Li Yi sat to the side and leisurely roasted meat. The two finally got tired of playing and ran over to crouch beside Li Yi. They swallowed as they watched the golden oil drip onto the charcoal, making a sizzling sound. This is not normal. This is definitely not normal. Li Xian stood far away and looked at this scene. The worry on his face deepened. Mingzu turned to look at him and asked, "How is it not normal?" "Miss Ruoqing has disappeared for 3 whole days." Li Xian counted with his fingers and looked at Li Yi. How can he be so calm and still have the mood to sit there and roast meat, and still have the mood to feed Shanning? Is this not good? Mingzu looked at him and asked, "Do you want him to be depressed?" Li Xian shook his head and said, "Have you heard of an old saying?" "What old saying?" Mingzu looked at him and asked, "What old saying?" Li Xian said in a low voice, "If you don't explode in silence, you will perish in silence." Mingzu looked at him in confusion. Which ancient person said this? Lu Sun. Who is Lu Sun? The writer, thinker, and educator that Li Yi mentioned last time. Don't worry about who Lu Sun is. Li Xian shook his head and said, "Don't be fooled by his smile on the surface. Maybe in his heart. In short, he is very dangerous. The calmer he appears, the more dangerous he is." Then what is normal for him to do? Look for him. Li Xian said anxiously. He should be more anxious than anyone else. He has been looking for you all over the world. It's impossible for him to be as calm as he is now. Think about it. If you are lost, what will he do? When you go there later, don't mention Miss Ruoqing, and don't mention holy religion. Li Xian said and then walked quickly. Let me do it. Li Xian snatched the iron skewer from Li Yi's hand and said, "You rest. I will roast it for a while." He didn't expect the crown prince to be so diligent. Li Yi handed the iron skewer to him and took a chicken wing for himself. Just now he was focused on feeding the 2 greedy cats and didn't eat much. "Put it down and don't move." Li Xian snatched the iron skewer from his hand and put the chicken wing on the plate with chopsticks. He said, "It's more convenient to eat like this." Li Yi looked at him and suddenly asked, "Do you have something to ask of me?" Li Xian shook his head violently. "No. Really, you only have this one chance." "I really don't." Li Yi shook his head. He didn't know what was wrong with him today. Just in case, it was better to stay away from him. After eating the chicken wing, he walked straight to the pavilion in the middle of the lake. The weather was good today. On his way back he would catch 2 fish, one in soup and one in braising. Li Xian finished roasting the fish. When he turned around, he found that Li Yi was no longer by his side. He looked back and said in shock, "Mingzu, stop him. He wants to jump into the lake." "This is why I changed my clothes when I came back," Li Yi explained to Rui Mississippi Lu and Drunk Ink. After all, the clothes he wore when he came back were different from when he went out. It was Mingzhu's clothes. It would indeed cause a big misunderstanding. Those who didn't know better would think that he had done something dirty. It was just that when he was fishing, he subconsciously dodged Mingzhu's grasp. In the end, the fish ran away, and he fell into the lake. The lake water at this time of year was piercingly cold. If it weren't for Mingzhu bringing him a new set of clothes from the women's college next door, he would probably be frozen sick today. Of course, many of her clothes were gender neutral, so he didn't look so out of place when he wore them. Although he had changed his clothes, he still looked a little disheveled. Rui helped him take off his coat and said, "I've asked Xiaohuan to boil the water. Husband, go take a hot bath first." The lake water was dirty. It was time for a good bath. Although he was wearing Mingzhu's clothes on the outside, his underwear was still wet. Soaking comfortably in the bathtub, the water vapor rose. Li Yi closed his eyes, and the remaining chill immediately disappeared. The door creaked and slowly closed. Someone added hot water to the bathtub. Li Yi said, "Help me massage my shoulders." The figure who was about to walk out of the door stopped in his tracks. Not long after, A pair of soft hands were placed on his shoulders. The hands moved slowly on his shoulders. At a certain moment Li Yi said, "Xiao Huan, you don't need to massage here. Just massage the previous place." I don't know where Miss Xiao Huan used to massage before." Hearing the voice behind him, Li Yi opened his eyes and turned his head. He said in surprise, "Ooh, Xiaoqing, why are you here?" The woman behind him smiled a little embarrassedly. Dwayner was making a fuss. Xiao Huan went to comfort him and asked me to come and add water for her. Chapter 968. Xiao Huan, what's wrong? Did someone bully you? Xiao Huan had been listless for the past 2 days. Today, in half a day, Li Yi found that she was in a daze 3 times. When she sat alone at the stone table in the courtyard, Li Yi walked over and sat opposite her, asking with concern. No. Xiao Huan shook her head. She could not say that it was because the servant girl called Xiaoqing was too diligent and took away all the work that was supposed to be done by her. Moreover, the son-in-law seemed to treat that Miss Xiaoqing differently. This was the first time he allowed another servant girl to grind the ink for him, and also the first time he allowed another servant girl to rub his shoulders when he was bathing. These things were all done by her in the past. Li Yi looked at her and said in disbelief, "Really?" The servant girl twisted her fingers together and looked at him pitifully. She asked, "Son-in-law, do you not like Xiao Huan anymore?" Li Yi did not know what the servant girl was thinking. Surprised, he got up and sat beside her. Pinching her face, he asked, "Who said that? Who said son-in-law doesn't like Xiao Huan?" The servant girl said pitifully, "But son-in-law doesn't need Xiao Huan to grind the ink, he doesn't need Xiao Huan to bathe." Li Yi then knew that she was actually jealous of Ruoqing. Ruoqing's identity as the Empress of Heaven had already been exposed. Although Li Xian did not let those people investigate further, but if she appeared in the capital with her original appearance, there would still be some trouble. So she ordered most of the followers of the holy religion to leave the capital, creating the illusion that the Empress of Heaven had already left the capital. Then, she disguised herself as a servant girl and came back without anyone knowing. Not to mention the other things of the holy religion, but the level of disguise, Li Yi himself had a deep understanding. With a mask on, even one's own parents would not be able to recognize it. Of course, he couldn't be more familiar with Ruoqing. This familiarity didn't just come from her face. On the first day he entered the mansion, he had recognized her at first sight. Knowing that she was Ruoqing, she naturally could not treat her like an ordinary servant girl. So she specially arranged for her to stay by her side, and arranged a room for her alone. Who would have thought that such a little difference would actually be discovered by Xiao Huan? Li Yi pulled her over and asked with a smile, "Are you jealous of little Qing?" The little maid sniffled. "Of course not." Li Yi leaned close to her ear and whispered a few words. Xiao Huan's eyes suddenly widened. She said in disbelief, "How is this possible? How could Xiaoqing be? Have you forgotten that the son-in-law also has a mask like that?" Xiao Huan was startled. Her face revealed a look of realization, and then she became a little embarrassed. If little Qing was Miss Ruoqing, then it wouldn't be a problem. Why would it be a problem if it was Miss Ruoqing? Even she couldn't understand it herself. If he didn't explain it clearly to Xiao Huan, who knew what she would think? The Li family was so big, and there were so many people. This matter, Li Yi didn't even have the time to tell Rui. If he showed any abnormalities, Ruoqing's efforts would be in vain. "Second madam, what's the matter?" The new servant girl of the Li family walked into a room and asked the woman in the room. Drunk Ink looked up at her and said, "It's nothing much. I heard that little Qing is good at grinding ink. I was just about to write a few words and wanted to ask for your help." Little Qing walked to the desk and said with a faint smile, "This is what I should do." There were not only the two of them in the room. When she was grinding ink, little Zhu sat on the other side of the desk with one hand under her chin, murmuring, "Where did Sister Ruoqing go?" Little Cui jeered at the side. "It must be that Sister Ruoqing thinks you are too annoying and doesn't want you anymore." "Say it again." "What's wrong with saying it again? You are just annoying." The two little servant girls quickly began to quarrel. Drunk Ink ignored them and looked at little Qing, who was grinding ink. She asked, "Where is little Qing from?" "She grew up in the capital." Drunk Ink shook her head and said, "Little Qing is very much like a good friend of mine, but she grew up in Qing and prefecture and only came to the capital 2 years ago." Little Qing smiled and did not speak. Drunk Ink asked again, "Who else is in the family?" Little Qing replied, "Only me." The two of them chatted like this. Not long after, Little Qing put down the ink and said, "Second madam, the ink is ready. If there is nothing else, I will go down first." Drunk Ink crossed her arms and looked at her, asking, "How long are you going to pretend for?" Little Qing looked surprised and asked, "Second madam, what are you talking about?" Drunk Ink suddenly hugged her and put her hands on her chest. "This is the feeling. Do you still want to pretend?" Ruoqing's face was red and she hurriedly said, "Drunk Ink, what are you doing? Let go of me." At this moment, her voice was very different from before. "Not calling me second madam now?" Drunk Ink looked at her with a proud expression and said, "Little Chui, close the door." Hearing the young Miss's order, Little Chui immediately ran over and closed the door. Ruoqing's expression finally became flustered and she hurriedly said, "Drunk Ink, what are you going to do? Don't do anything stupid." Drunk Ink looked at her and snorted, "You even dare to lie to me. Of course you will be punished according to the family rules." Hearing the words family rules, Ruoqing's face became even redder. She looked at little Zhu and said anxiously, "You Zhu, come help me." Little Zhu rolled up her sleeves and ran over, asking excitedly, "Sister Drunk Ink, how do you want me to help you?" Ever since Li Duan could walk steadily, he liked to walk, and Rui did not have to watch him all the time. Now it was approaching the Lantern Festival. For the Li family, the most important day of this month was not the Lantern Festival, but the happy event of welcoming Drunk Ink into the family at the end of the month. Rui handed over a booklet and said, "This is the guest list written by old madam. Husband, take a look and see if anyone is missing. It's time to have someone write an invitation. Old madam is familiar with this kind of thing. I don't think she will miss anyone." Li looked at it and put it aside. Rui looked at him and asked again, "Miss Ruoqing is gone. Husband, are you really not going to look for her?" Li was actually about to tell her about this matter, but he did not expect Rui to speak first. He said awkwardly, "You may not know, but actually, little Qing is Miss Ruoqing." Unlike what Li had imagined, Rui's face did not show much surprise. She looked at Li and said with a smile, "I thought husband would hide this matter from me for a few more days." Li said in surprise, "Wife, you know all about it." There are many ways to tell a person apart from their appearance, figure, behavior, aura. Rui looked at him and said, "Judging people by their appearance is the worst way." Li explained, "Ruoqing's identity is special. If others know, it will be troublesome." "I don't blame husband. I know all this." Rui leaned on his shoulder and asked softly, "But I don't know how many good sisters I have." Li said in surprise, "Wife, don't you only have one sister, Rui? Including Xiaohuan, there are only 2. Rui shook her head and said, "Other than Rui and Xiaohuan, there are also Sister Zumo, Sister Ruoqing, Sister Emingzu, and Sister Lin from the Qi Kingdom. It depends on husband whether there are any Sister Lin." Li shuddered. He thought that spring was coming, but at this moment he felt that the weather was getting colder and colder. The weather was getting colder. Keep warm and avoid catching a cold. Chapter 969. Never underestimate a woman. If she had the identity of a grandmaster in addition to being a woman, then she should not be underestimated even more. This was what Li Yi had learned from his own experience. "In fact, I have long known about Miss Ruoqing's feelings for my husband." Rui leaned against his chest and said, "In the past few years, from Qing and prefecture to the capital, such a large brothel has been taken care of by a woman. I can imagine how hard she has worked. If it were not for the fact that she already loves my husband to the bone, which woman would be willing to do this for a man? She does not want to be the empress who is respected by all. She only wants to be the little Qing who follows my husband. How can I not see it? There are not many women in the world who value affection and righteousness so much, but my husband has met all of them. Why is my husband so lucky? I want to bite you. Ruoqing's identity was no longer a secret to Rui and the others. But in the mansion, she still called herself Little Qing, and did all the things that a servant girl should do. After all, her other identity was a little too shocking. There was a bite mark of love on his neck in exchange for Rui's acknowledgement of Ruoqing. No matter how broad-minded Rui was, it was impossible for her to remain calm from beginning to end in this kind of thing. So when she proposed that good things come in pairs, and let drunken Mo and Ruoqing enter the Li family at the same time, he did not agree. It was better to take this matter step by step. While eating, Mississippi Lu, who was sitting next to him, glanced at him and asked, "What's wrong with your neck?" Drunken Mo also looked over with a puzzled expression. Li looked at Rui. Rui's pretty face was slightly red. She lowered her head and bit her chopsticks, and at the same time, gave him a threatening look. Li swallowed the words he was about to say. Rui's threat was much more useful than Mississippi Lu's. Before Zui Mo and Ruoqing married into the Li family openly, ignoring Rui's threat, he could only stay alone in the room at night. He would rather offend Mississippi Lu than Rui. He picked up a mouthful of food, touched the bite mark on his neck, and said casually, "Oh, you mean this? I had nothing better to do, so I bit it randomly." Xiao Huan put down her chopsticks and twisted her head to see if she could bite her own neck. Mississippi Lu also put down her chopsticks and looked at him with her arms crossed. "Take another bite and we'll see." Li asked in surprise, "Here?" Mississippi Lu nodded. "Right here." Li thought about it and said, "All right then." Seeing this, Xiao Huan immediately turned her head, wanting to see how her son-in-law could do this action that she could not do. Li rinsed his mouth, and then looked at Mississippi Lu. To be precise, he stared at her snow-white neck and asked, "Have you washed your neck?" Too many things had happened in the 4th year of Jinghe. The fall of the Cui family, the loss of power of the king of Shu, and a large number of forces in the capital had suffered a bloody purge. Some families fell, and others stood up. The current situation in the capital, and even in the Jing kingdom, had been very stable. The people's hearts and the imperial court had stabilized. Although Li Xian had just succeeded the throne, he had a high reputation in the imperial court. With Mingzhu's assistance, he could easily stabilize the general situation. From the moment they stepped here, the turbulent capital began to calm down. After observing for several days, Li Xian finally confirmed that the incident did not seem to have much effect on Li Yi. Not only that, the entire Li family seemed to be exactly the same as before. Even the servant girl called Xiaozhu did not seem to feel anything about her mistress's departure. When she brought the wine over, she was smiling like a flower. This made him feel relieved but also puzzled. Based on his understanding of Li Yi, he could not be so calm at this time. Li Xian looked at him and asked suspiciously, "Did you hide Miss Ruoqing?" Li Yi drank a cup of warm grape wine and shook his head. "No." Li Xian looked at the servant girl who was pouring wine for Li Yi and suddenly said in surprise, "Your servant girl looks unfamiliar. Is she new?" He waved his hand and said, "Don't just look at the marquee. I've run out of wine, why don't you pour it?" "Pour what?" Li Yi slapped the table and glared at him. "If you want to drink, pour it yourself. Don't you have hands?" Li Xian looked at him in a daze, and then looked at the servant girl standing to the side. A thoughtful expression appeared on his face. After a moment he stared at Li Yi. "You even hid it from me?" Li Yi poured more wine for him. "If other people knew, you would be the one in trouble. But you're Ruoqing, is she really the empress of the holy religion?" The dissatisfaction on Li Xian's face instantly disappeared. He asked with some excitement, "Is it like what she said in the letter?" "Correct." Li Yi nodded. "Tell me, is there such a possibility?" Li Xian looked at him, thought for a moment, and said, "Now there are 2 empresses of the holy religion. If we make Taoist none," he made a throat-slitting gesture and murmured, "then this holy religion can be used by us. Didn't you say that the holy religion has 100,000 believers in the Qi kingdom? When the time comes, we can work together." That being said, Taoist Nun was a grandmaster. Even if she couldn't beat them, she could still run. Moreover, she was in the Qi kingdom, surrounded by followers, and there were many masters among them. If they really fought force with force, the current Lu Meng would not be a match for her. It would not be easy to deal with her. It was slightly more difficult. Li Yi did not accompany Li Xian in his daydreaming. He asked, "How is His Majesty's health?" The winter this year was unusually cold. The weather had been good for a few days, but it became gloomy again. It would not warm up before the Lantern Festival. In the past, when the weather was good, he could occasionally go to the palace to get a free meal. Now it had been a long time since he was summoned. Li Xian drank up the wine in his cup, shook his head and said, "Father now spends more time in sleep than when he is awake." The old emperor's illness worsened with the seasons, and it was getting worse year by year. This winter was long and cold, and there was no sign of it warming up. He, Li Xian, and Imingzu had tried to avoid this topic. What did the imperial doctor say? If he can survive this winter, there may be some relief, but if... Before Li Xian finished his words, he fell into silence. Li Yi looked up at the sky. It was gloomy, as if the whole sky was about to press down, making it difficult to breathe. "Your Highness, His Majesty summons you." A eunuch came in from outside and said respectfully, "Marquis Li, His Majesty also summons you." You're tuning in to the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.